Companies are doing mass layoffs while complaining about not being able to find enough employees. Some workers are min-maxing the system by working multiple full-time jobs at the same time, while others need to work hours of unpaid overtime at just one job. This is not to mention that the gig economy is consuming entire sections of the workforce. The 9-to-5 was created by American labor unions in the 1800s and became mainstream over 100 years ago, when jobs looked like this and this. It was revolutionary for its time. But how many of the modern problems in corporate America are caused by trying to make an outdated system fit with every single modern job?
To the U.S., 8.4 million people in the nation are working multiple jobs.
850,000 jobs. Wages went up for American workers.
Instead, they're working multiple jobs. It's called being overemployed.
And one part-time, but I need both of them to pay my bills every month, my rent and groceries, so just working all the time.
A report by the management consulting firm McKinsey & Company found that 2/3 of the average human's wealth is in the work they can do over their lifetime. Everybody has time, effort, and experience they can trade for money, and those tradable commodities are worth twice as much as all the other assets that the average person possesses. A regular 9-to-5 job has been a great way for billions of people to safely exchange a predictable amount of their time for a predictable paycheck, with predictable career advancement as they gain more experience. But this one-size-fits-all model for work doesn't fit with every job, and trying to make it work has been bad for employees and bad for companies for 3 reasons, which is causing 3 equally terrible trends in the job market. The first trend is that it makes time a worthless asset. The Ford Motor Company was one of the first businesses in America to adopt the 9-to-5 40-hour work week. Henry Ford did this to make his company the most attractive place for auto workers to get a job. This allowed him to pull talent away from other automakers without paying his workers more. In order to compete with Ford, other automakers were forced to offer the same 40-hour work week with paid overtime. Eventually, in order to compete with the automakers, other companies were also forced to offer 9-to-5 jobs so that their best workers didn't quit and go and work on the car assembly line. These auto workers had tightly defined and repetitive tasks, so unless the workers succumbed to exhaustion, they could do a consistent amount of work for every hour they spent at their post, and every additional hour would produce the same amount of output. If you work in a modern office job, you will know that your work is nothing like this. Sometimes there is a lot to do, and sometimes there is nothing to do, but you still need to be there 8 hours a day looking busy no matter what. Back when the 40-hour week was being fought for by workers' unions, most Americans worked in manufacturing. But today, most people work in the services sector, which is more diverse than you might expect. Unless you are working on a farm or in a factory, you are a service worker, and your job could be anything from making strategic corporate decisions to making coffees. Clearly, these jobs are very different, and should have a different schedule, but most of the corporate world has tried to make the 9-to-5 fit all jobs. But this doesn't work, because no service jobs have tasks consistently delivered on a fine-tuned production line. Work comes and goes as internal and external customers make demands, and that means when people are busy and need to do more than 8 hours in a day to finish their work, they are expected to work, quote, reasonable unpaid overtime. According to an ADP Research Institute study of office professionals, unpaid overtime jumped to an average of 9.2 hours per week in 2021. More than a full extra day to keep up with employer demands. But when there is little to no work to do because a project has just been completed or sales are seasonally slow, workers are still expected to put in the 40 hours a week because that's what the business is paying them for. If you're in this kind of job, your best option is to try and find something that makes you look busy. But if you don't have something to work on, you are probably going to be given meaningless tasks just to fill the mandatory 8-hour day. If this was just another story about companies screwing over their workers with outdated business practices, it wouldn't need a video. But the 40-hour work week isn't even good for companies. So it's time to learn how money works to find out why we might be in the midst of the overdue collapse of the 9-to-5. According to data from the US Census Bureau, McKinsey & Company, and compiled by Statista, growth in gig work and freelance jobs have outgrown typical permanent jobs by 500% over the last decade. Gig work apps have become very popular with unskilled workers due to their low barrier to entry and flexible working arrangements. Someone with a phone and a bike can start working for a food delivery service like Uber Eats, Postmates, DoorDash, Grubhub, or all of them all at the same time in less than an hour by filling out an online form. This has been a highly appealing alternative to minimum wage jobs that still rely on the antiquated process of handing in a resume, spending weeks doing job interviews, only to still get ghosted by a fast food joint offering $7.25 an hour for an unpredictable schedule. Gig work jobs usually also pay terribly, but people get to work as much as they want, when they want, and they can work around another full-time job for extra money. Even with all of the problems of gig work, you can see why it has become so popular. The popularity of freelancing and private contracting has also exploded. This is more popular among skilled workers who can sell their services to businesses just like an employee, but with no ongoing agreement. They are only paid when there is work to be done. Private contracts are usually an agreed-upon price for an agreed-upon outcome, like $10,000 to build a company website, but they can also be billed hourly for roles like security, administrative assistants, or on-demand workers. According to a report by the management consulting firm Oliver Wyman, healthcare workers have been one of the fastest-growing groups of workers ditching typical permanent roles in favor of working as private contractors. On-call nurses, doctors, and hospital support staff already work unpredictable hours, so they don't sacrifice much by working as contractors instead of a direct employee. According to the report, some nurses have elected to work in the temporary staffing market so they can take on fewer hours, as mental health has become a top priority for workers in the industry. Private contractors in all industries are usually paid more for their time than permanent employees because the business only pays for the hours of services they actually need, which means most of the time their total out-of-pocket will be lower. With mass layoffs dominating the news cycle, people are also finding out the hard way that if they work in an at-will employment state, their 9-to-5 doesn't give them much security anyway. So, workers at all skill levels are seeing they can make more, and businesses are realizing they can cut down on expenses by doing away with the rigid 9-to-5 workday, which is the second reason it's slowly becoming a relic of corporate history. But the death of the 9-to-5 is not going to be a good deal for everybody. Unfortunately for now, businesses are going to be the biggest winners out of this shift, even if they have to pay their contractors and gig workers slightly more per hour. The first loss is benefits. If you work as a private contractor, you are becoming your own boss, which means that even though you are making more money, there is overhead that you become responsible for. Benefits like paid time off, training, retirement plans, accounting, and health insurance are going to come out of your pocket. Health insurance through a regular employer is normally far more affordable than private options. For gig workers, this can be especially tough, because health insurance premiums for people who ride motorized scooters through late-night traffic to deliver food to people's homes is simply unaffordable on the income of a delivery driver. Even if you are doing highly skilled contracting, if you don't manage these expenses carefully, you will end up with less in your pocket than if you just stuck with a regular permanent position. And your loss is their gain. According to a survey conducted by Forbes, small and medium enterprises were hiring more contract workers because it simplified their accounting and reduced the ever-increasing expenses of human resource management. It's not just small companies either. According to CNBC, contract workers have outnumbered direct employees at Google and other large tech companies since 2018, and the ratio became even more skewed during COVID. Google already has large human resources and accounting departments, so they are pursuing contract work for two other reasons. The first is that the most talented engineers have realized that they can make more money working off one-off projects for lots of companies than they could by being a full-time employee with just one company. The demand for talent during the good times meant that these companies just had to pay what these top engineers were asking. Some highly specialized engineers could bill up to $10,000 an hour for their work to these companies. Even for a company as rich as Google, it was better to pay them only for the hours. They really needed them, instead of paying them millions of dollars a year as a permanent salary for the odd project where their skills would be needed. The second reason is that during bad times, like right now, getting rid of contractors doesn't count as layoffs, so companies can easily cut expenses without technically laying off any staff. Big layoffs signal to investors and other employees that the business is in a bad shape, and that they would be better off investing their money or building a career somewhere else. There are three groups that are really going to benefit from the death of the 9-to-5. But their gain is all at the expense of one big group that statistically you are a part of: the regular workers. Entry-level workers who can get gig work are not paid well, but they weren't paid well in minimum wage jobs either. They have just gained some flexibility to work when they want. High-skilled workers who can move to contract roles can make a lot of money by working for the highest bidding company. They only lost the idea of job security that never really existed for them anyway. Companies are also taking full advantage of the death of the 9-to-5 by cutting down on their biggest expense center. The losers are regular workers right in the middle who are in roles that can't be gigified but aren't in demand enough to be contracted out. The fixed expenses of operating as a contractor, health insurance, business licensing, accounting, and everything else means it's only worth it for people earning well over the average wage. If you are earning $60,000 as a permanent employee, you would have to charge $80,000 a year as a contractor to break even. And not many businesses are going to pay that $20,000 premium for a standard job. New regulations intended to protect contractors and workers are another problem. If a contractor files for unemployment after their job is completed with a company, they can file an SS-8 form with the IRS, which can trigger an audit to determine if that contractor and other contractors working for the company meet the requirements to be counted as a permanent employee. If they do, then the company has to cover their unemployment benefits and has to provide other benefits to every other contractor in the business as well. Businesses don't want to take that risk, so they use staffing agencies to handle all the compliance for them. According to data from the American Staffing Association, most contractors now work through middleman staffing companies. For contractors working through these middlemen, it can combine all of the problems of permanent employment with none of the benefits of being a private contractor. And that's the third reason why the 9-to-5 is going extinct. It lets companies pull some creative business maneuvers. Stop me if you've heard this one before. An entry-level job paying $8 an hour with no benefits at an unremarkable company. Oh, and they want you to have at least 3 years experience in a similar role and preferably a master's degree. Why the f are entry-level jobs not entry-level anymore?
The latest jobs report found widespread hiring.
One man's quest to find a job is raising questions about the labor shortage right now. He says he applied to more than 60 entry-level positions.
Particularly strong in hospitality, leisure, and healthcare.
We have created more jobs in 2 years than any presidential term.
Searching for a job is a difficult and time-consuming task. Most Americans do not have enough savings to survive for more than 2 weeks without going into debt, which means it is also stressful. No matter how efficient the hiring process is made, you are never going to have fun looking for a job, and nothing can change that. But the corporate world has introduced a lot of obstacles that make the job of finding a job as painful as possible. Filling out online forms for information already on your resume, going through multiple rounds of interviews, and getting ghosted by hiring managers for hundreds of positions is enough to drive anybody mad.
Responded to me. 4 of those went on to a phone call after an email exchange, and then 1 of those turned into an interview. 0 of them turned into a job that was actually desperate for help.
It's also simply bad business. Attracting the right talent is vital for business success. If businesses make their application process too difficult, they are going to filter out everybody but the most desperate candidates, which are rarely the best candidates. Companies that ask for multiple years of experience from applicants applying for entry-level jobs also expose themselves to a similar risk. It might sound advantageous for the business to get an employee with years of experience that they can pay like a fresh graduate, but company management frequently overlooks the reason that these applicants are looking for entry-level jobs in a field they have been working in for years, and it's that they are not that good at their job and they need to keep moving companies before their poor performance catches up with them. A recent study conducted by Portland State University and published by the Harvard Business Review found that overqualified candidates did not outperform the control group, and that paying significantly under market rates for talent will cost most businesses more in other areas. Bloated hiring processes are also expensive. Sponsored job postings on sites like Indeed, LinkedIn, and Glassdoor can cost hundreds of dollars per day, easily more than the successful applicant will be paid once they are on board and working. Multiple rounds of interviews also take paid hours from HR, hiring managers, and third-party recruiters. Recruiters work on a commission basis for successfully placed candidates. But if a company makes candidates go through multiple rounds of interviews, the recruiters can ask for a higher fee, or they will be incentivized to send their best recruits to companies that have a simple hiring process so they can get paid quickly and reliably. It's bad business, and good company managers know it, but there are 3 reasons why they still do it anyway. The first reason is that it's become too easy to apply for a job. Indeed has 60 million monthly users, and LinkedIn has over 200 million. Online job boards make it easy for applicants to apply for hundreds of jobs every day based on convenient filters that let them search results by industry, seniority, experience, and salary range. Companies can get several thousand applications for a single position, because the optimal job search strategy has become spamming your resume into as many positions that vaguely fit the description of the job you are looking for. Companies have attempted to adapt to this by having landing pages where users can fill in their details into the company's own database by manually completing an online form. These forms typically ask for information that should be included on any good resume, but it enters it in a way that can be read by a computer instead of being read by a hiring manager, saving them the time of manually going through thousands of applications by hand to find the attributes they are looking for in a candidate. The backend of these forms will enable the hiring manager to search through the candidates by a similar set of filters that the candidates themselves use to find the job posting, evening the arms race between the volume of applications and the people that check those applications.
You're quantifying human behavior, human expressions, human voices, turning that into data.
We're now using artificial intelligence to help companies find the very best talent.
Some companies have started using application tracking systems, or ATS, which use AI to scrape resumes for keywords to populate databases that can be filtered in the same way without requiring candidates to fill in a data entry form themselves.
And most likely you were being analyzed by an algorithm. How does that make you feel?
I feel like that would blindside me entirely.
This practice has become so common that there are now AI tools like Getty, JobScan, and Resi that check resumes against job posts and make sure that they are appealing to the AI system that check resumes before the hiring manager does. So, an AI will write a resume to satisfy another AI to stand out against thousands of other applications also written and checked by AI. Applying for a job has become easier than when you had to search the classifieds and call companies one at a time. But this means people can apply for more jobs. More applications means that the acceptance rate at each job is much lower. And the best way to deal with this low acceptance rate is to apply for more jobs, which means that applying for a job has become harder all over again. Nobody is to blame for this new paradigm. I love making fun of dumb corporate decisions on this channel, but in this case, they are just reacting to new technology that has made finding applicants easier than ever, and everybody else is reacting to the same thing. The competitive meta of job searching has shifted from a firm handshake to mass spamming resumes to get past increasingly difficult spam filters. But that's just one reason, and there are plenty of things that companies are doing which are just dumb. The second reason that companies have made it so difficult to apply for jobs is because they want to cover their ass. There are lots of reasons why a hiring manager might want to pick one job applicant over another, but not all of them are legal. And even if they don't violate any equal opportunity laws, some might be a bad look for the company. By listing lots of unreasonable job requirements, the company increases the likelihood that no applicant will tick every box, which means they can hire whomever they want and cover themselves by saying all of the other candidates were missing one or more of the role's prerequisites. It's rare that companies get much pushback over rejecting an external candidate. Most people have just become accustomed to never hearing back from a majority of jobs they apply for. If you have ever applied for a job recently, you will know that no response is the new rejection letter.
First time.
If companies do respond, they try to keep it as generic as possible, so that they do not expose themselves to any potential unfair hiring practice lawsuits, which makes the long list of job requirements redundant. Where these do help companies, though, is in rejecting internal hires. According to a study by Cornell University, internal hires outperformed outside hires, but only because they are more familiar with the business from day one, requiring less training to get into a new role, and because they were more likely to stay in a job longer than the outside hire. A similar study by McKinsey Consulting found that a strong culture of internal promotions helped with staff retention and encouraged staff to work harder to qualify because they could see it paying off for them.
The pandemic, a lot of companies are not flush financially, so they can't afford to hire a new person.
Internal promotions are effective, but they are also more difficult than outside hires. If you get promoted or moved around within your company, then someone else needs to be hired to fill your role. And if someone gets promoted to fill your role, then HR has to fill 3 positions instead of just 1, which is expensive, difficult, and triples the chance that someone won't be able to perform their new job. People hired internally also don't have probationary periods, so if they do underperform in their new role, they are harder to let go. Internal hires have advantages, but external hires are easier and present less risk. If a company has no strong internal candidates for a new role, but it doesn't want to lose the benefits that come from occasionally promoting people from within, then the most effective strategy for them is to increase the job requirements so they can tell their existing staff that, unfortunately, they don't qualify based on the job's criteria. I know I say it a lot, but this is another reason why the best thing you can do in your career in your early years is to consistently apply for new jobs that are better than the one you currently have. Workers that change their jobs every 2 years earn on average 50% more than their colleagues who show loyalty to a company. Sticking around might get you a promotion, but there's no way to know how long it will take for other people to move out of their positions. Having experience at different companies is also more valuable to new employers than long-term tenure at a single employer. When employers ask for 3 years experience, they are often satisfied with candidates that talk about dealing with similar challenges in different industries. So you should apply anyway and just have some kind of experience to talk about, even if it's not doing the same job or even a job at all. And that's the third reason why employers make job requirements that are so out of touch with the job they are offering. They want to see how applicants deal with the challenge. There is an old saying in business that even if you are not in sales, you are in sales. Most people do not have jobs that require cold calling a list of leads to generate revenue, but those soft skills are still important in every job. Dealing with difficult customers, difficult coworkers, being able to present a strong argument, or simply showing empathy for a client's needs are all skills that can be demonstrated by an applicant when they are questioned about a shortcoming of their qualifications against the job requirements. If you're in a job interview and can provide a strong response to a question like this that eases the interviewer's concerns without disregarding them, you will probably end up doing better than someone who didn't even have that experience gap. If you can deal with an interviewer's concerns, then you have clearly demonstrated that you can deal with the other challenges as they are presented to you, a skill that is worth more than anything you can write down on a resume. And that's the fourth reason. Some managers do know what makes a good hire, but most don't. People are promoted into management positions based off having experience in a subordinate role. Managers are therefore naturally inclined to believe that when it comes to hiring someone, more experience is more better. It's a reasonable assumption that someone that has practice in a role should be better than someone with no practice. In fact, I said it at the beginning of this video and you probably just accepted it. But corporate roles in non-technical fields change so rapidly today that the benefit is negligible. A 30-year-old study conducted by the Internal Congress of Applied Psychology in Madrid found no strong correlation between experience and job performance. Since this study was published, follow-up studies including a publication from the Harvard Business Review in 2019 found the same thing. Most corporate managers do not read journal articles about statistical correlations between hiring parameters and job performance. Most go off their own experience, which is the value of experience. They do the same for other job requirements because the safest move for them is to find a candidate that ticks the most boxes. Nobody likes job interviews. They waste a lot of time and they waste a lot of company time. Every hour you spend in an interview, the company must pay the person interviewing you. So why the f is it becoming so common for profit-driven companies to ask for multiple rounds of interviews for even the most basic of jobs, when most of the time they are just going to ghost you anyway?
Competing against a smaller pool of people. Now you only have maybe 3 or 4 of the people you are fighting to win the job.
Scheduling interviews, sometimes those interviews have got multiple rounds, maybe 1, 2, 3, 4 rounds of interview.
If you spend any time looking for a job in today's job market, you probably realize how broken most major corporations' hiring processes are.
Filling a position is an expensive process that companies are only making more expensive for themselves. Some companies sit down with hundreds of people through as many as 17 rounds of interviews. That's hundreds of man-hours spent finding one person for one job when just 20 years ago, it was rare to do more than 2 rounds of interviews. According to a report by the Harvard Business Review, this trend is also leading to worse outcomes for employers. High-performing employees are pulling out of job applications after being asked to come back for round after round of interviews, so companies are being left with only the most desperate applicants that are willing to jump through their hoops. This is wasting people's time, costing businesses lots of money, and creating worse outcomes for everyone. But there are 4 reasons why businesses don't care and will probably keep increasing the number of interviews they make new applicants do. The first reason is that it increases their leverage in the negotiating process. According to a report by the Bureau of Labor Statistics, it now takes the average person 24 weeks to go through the hiring and interview process to get into a new job. If you are unemployed and looking for a new job, then after 24 weeks of interviews, you are going to be desperate to accept anything, and you won't risk losing the offer by negotiating a better salary or benefits.
That's smart.
If you do have a job, this strategy can still work for you. A current employer is only going to be so patient about you taking time off to attend interviews, so going through this process once will be hard enough. So you take the job or stay at your current employer that is angry at you for missing so many days. According to the same report, the #1 reason that people turned down a new job was because the offered wage was too low, and in 2023, people are also turning down jobs that don't offer work from home flexibility.
About a third of the managers want employees to return in order to monitor them. Then about a quarter of those managers want employees to return to ensure that they take shorter breaks.
Respondents were much more likely to overlook this, though, if they had gone through an extended hiring process. Employees are also less likely to leave a company if they believe it was a real challenge to secure their job in the first place, so management can use a difficult interview process as a staff retention technique before people even become staff. Psychologists call this the sunk cost fallacy. If you have already spent so much time pursuing a job opportunity, you don't want it to be a waste by not accepting it if you get an offer. Hiring managers just call it an effective negotiation technique. For the employers, this is a calculated expense. The hours that they need to pay HR and a hiring manager to sit in an interview room will be paid for by forcing you to accept a lower starting salary for your entire career with that company. Other companies and hiring managers are not this smart. But getting the upper hand over your pay and benefits is just the first reason. The second reason that companies have started to ask you to come in for multiple interviews is because they think it will magically make them a better company. Most business managers do not read workforce surveys from the Harvard Business Review. They only hear about companies like Google, Meta, and Apple requiring multiple rounds of interviews for even so much as a summer internship. Roles in big tech require a lot of hard skills, and because they offer such competitive salaries, benefits, and career opportunities, they have far more applications than jobs to give out. Google received 3 million job applications in 2021 and hired only 7,000 people. A former senior vice president of product management with Google told CNBC that, quote, hiring took 6 to 9 months and people sat for 15 to 25 interviews. It was an awful experience. That's a quote from the person that did the hiring, so it's even more stressful for the people that are seeking a job. Google and other large tech companies need to do this though, so they get the best employees from the huge list of applicants they receive. A single good developer could make the company hundreds of millions of dollars, and a single weak developer could cost just as much.
What we're doing as a consequence of being in this period is we're being very deliberate on our hiring. That means we're continuing to hire, but not everywhere in the company are we hiring.
Engineers at these companies can also make 7 figures a year before they are 30, so even the most outstanding applicants are willing to jump through multiple rounds of interviews because there is nowhere else that they can reliably earn this much money. In my own personal experience, I did 10 interviews with a firm that offered me a job as an investment banking associate. Each interview covered something different, so there were clear meetings to test financial technical skills, another for market knowledge, and I had a one-on-one meeting with an MD to test interpersonal skills, and a panel with senior bankers so that I could ask my own questions. For these jobs, firms both have a greater need to interview candidates rigorously, and they get away with doing it because they will pay successful applicants life-changing amounts of money. Regular managers at regular companies interviewing for regular jobs with regular salaries have ignored those details and just seen that prestigious companies that everybody wants to be like have lots of interviews, so they should have lots of interviews too. The third reason that you are being forced to do so many job interviews is that it's not their time they are wasting. Hiring managers and HR departments rarely have any direct ownership of the business they are hiring for, and they get paid for the time they spend doing interviews. If they can fill up their own calendars with interviews, they can even justify to their own managers that they need additional manpower on their teams to share the workload. A bad hire can also be detrimental to the business and make the actual job of the managers in charge of hiring a subordinate much harder on a daily basis.
Leaders want these very elaborate hiring processes just so that if it goes south, there's blame to go around.
The cost benefit is clear to managers looking out for their own interests. They need to be extremely careful about who they hire, and if that takes a long time, then so be it. Managers assume safety in numbers. If they do lots of interviews, they will filter out bad potential hires, but it doesn't work. Some people are just better at interviewing than others, and apart from roles like sales or team management, there isn't any overlap between interview skills and job performance. You may have noticed that this has only become worse as companies have started relying on recruitment agencies to fill more jobs. Third-party job recruiters make their money by placing candidates they find with companies they sell their services to. The hiring company will pay the recruiter a commission for every role they fill, usually paid out in 3 stages. One when an applicant first takes the job, a second at 6 months, and a third once the applicant has been with the company for a full year. You win! According to an industry report produced by LinkedIn, the demand for recruitment services has increased by over 25% since the start of the pandemic, as companies have had to adapt to a changing job market and the changes that came with online interviews. The hiring manager for a company looking to fill a role doesn't actually pay the recruiter until they hire someone, so they have an opposing incentive. The recruiter wants to fill the job as quickly as possible with someone who is just good enough to hold the job for 12 months, and the hiring manager wants to sample as many candidates as possible before taking the risk of hiring someone and paying a commission. Good recruiters will normally interview candidates before they recommend them to one of their clients that's looking for a new employee. So the rising popularity of recruiting firms means that you are likely to end up doing at least one extra interview when you start looking for your next job. The fourth reason that you need to sit through so many job interviews is because a lot of companies want a reason to reject you. The US Department of Labor mandates that before an immigrant can be offered a job in America, the company employing them has made every effort to ensure that the admission of foreign workers to work in the United States on a permanent or temporary basis will not adversely affect the job opportunities, wages, and working conditions of American workers. This is not a "they took our jobs" thing. Sometimes companies will want a foreign worker because they are the best person for the job. But the only way to offer them a role is to show that they made every effort to hire an American first, and the same goes in other countries as well. More often than foreign workers, companies just want to hire internal candidates or people they already know, but company policy dictates that they must advertise the role externally. Unfortunately for you, that at least once in your career, you are going to go through a series of interviews where the company just needs to tick a box before they give the job to the person they wanted to in the first place. This is also the reason why most of the time, if you are unsuccessful applying for a job, you just get ghosted. If a company gives any reason for not hiring you over someone else, there is the potential that they expose themselves to legal liability. If they say nothing, they are safe. In the past 12 months, the job market has been defined by trends and buzzwords like the Great Resignation, quiet quitting, quiet hiring, quiet firing, rage applying, loud quitting, and my new personal favorite, resenteeism. Most of these all meant the same thing. Nobody knew what the f was going on. And that is the fourth reason why companies started to love doing multiple rounds of job interviews. It let them hedge their bets on the future. Companies simultaneously didn't have enough talent and also had too many employees. Announcing layoffs or hiring freezes sent a bad message to investors and existing employees, especially in businesses where a portion of employee compensation is paid out in company stock options. As a way to force employees to stay loyal, tech and finance companies pay big bonuses, but they pay them as restricted stock units, shortened to RSUs, that the employees are not allowed to sell for a period of time. The industry average is 2 years. If the employee leaves the company before their RSUs are released, they lose them. So anytime an employee quits, they will be giving up 2 years worth of bonuses that they have already earned. Psychosocially, people are much more motivated by loss than gain, so restricted stock is a great way to force staff loyalty. It's a scummy tactic, but normally these bonus structures are only given to employees that are very valuable to their companies and are already making a lot of money. Other companies also offer signing bonuses to compensate new hires that they poach from their competition for the RSUs that they will never be able to cash. Time stock bonuses only work when a company's workforce thinks that those options will be worth anything once they are allowed to sell them. If a company stops hiring, that's a good sign to everybody that they are no longer growing. And if a company is not growing, its shares are not going to be worth as much to the employees waiting to cash them out, so it becomes a good time to leave. Even if companies are not trying to avoid scrutiny, a long hiring process is a good strategy to see if the role was really needed at all. If someone quits, their work can be delegated to their coworkers on a temporary basis. If the company takes a few months to hire a replacement, they can assess if tasks are still getting completed by the team with a lower headcount. If they are, they just cancel the job search. If they are not, they can just pick from one of the candidates that they have running through multiple rounds of interviews and is desperate to accept any job they get offered. Corporate America has become obsessed with company culture, but those Friday afternoon drinks and team building days are papering over a terrible trend which is making your workplace miserable and stalling your career.
I really mean the entire Apple team. I can go out in a retail store and the retail teams.
Together, we can finally put people at the center of our technology.
Operating in a clean, fast-paced, friendly environment. A team full of people just like you.
Company culture is one of the biggest trends in corporate management. Small companies with as few as 20 employees are hiring culture managers whose full-time job is to promote a collaborative and positive work environment. These are full-time employees that from a bottom-line business perspective do nothing but make the other 19 employees more engaged with their work.
Culture is what keeps people around.
According to a survey of job seekers and hiring managers conducted by Robert Half, a workforce analytics firm, 91% of managers said that a candidate's fit with the organizational culture was more important than their skills and experience. Hilariously, a PwC survey on company culture found that 69% of companies believed that their culture gave them a competitive edge. Presumably, the other 31% of companies realized that an office didn't need a ping pong table and kombucha on tap to be a nice place to work. Managing corporate culture is expensive. Corporate culture managers are earning an average salary package of $110,000 a year according to Glassdoor. Direct salary expenses also don't capture the additional costs of running culture events and the lost man hours in the name of team building. It's a big investment and one that is not paying off. Most workers report only engaging in workplace team activities because they felt they had to. They said that they would rather spend their hours at work focus on their job tasks and after-work hours with family and friends or catching up on personal errands.
None of us at work like it when some person in HR comes and says, "Hey guys, we're doing this fun activity from X time to X time, and you had no say in the matter, but you have to go." And I think we can all agree that this is terrible.
Even when activities were funded by the company, most workers said that they did not enjoy what they called corporate prescribed mandatory fun. An article in the Harvard Business Review found that these types of business environments were one of the main reasons that top-performing employees left the business. So, why the company still obsessed with their culture if it's so expensive to maintain and only makes employees want to quit? Well, there are actually 4 reasons, and each one is worse than the last. The first reason is that companies don't want to create a company culture, they want to create a company cult. Management at large companies has discovered that they can build an undue level of control over their employees if they control their thinking and behavior in the workplace. Senior management will push the narrative that the company stands for something greater than generating an acceptable rate of return to its shareholders.
But that's exactly what it is. It's a business of people serving people. And it was, is, and always will be about the culture of the company.
Startups are prone to do this with overly enthusiastic founders that think they are going to change the world. But the Harvard Business Review found again that cult-like behaviors were most common in the largest companies. Apple, Tesla, Nordstrom, and Harley-Davidson were the examples their report gave. Ritualistic behavior is a common characteristic of cults and companies that take their culture too far.
We have a lot of companies that really brag about their culture. It's on their website. There's even one company in town, I won't mention their name, but will pay their employees $2,000 if they tattoo sort of the company culture on their bodies. Not a joke. $2,000.
It is still mandatory for Walmart employees to recite the company cheer once a day in all of their stores around the country. According to the company, Sam Walton, the company's founder, toured a Korean tennis ball factory in 1975 that started every day with a company chant. Walton, who was obsessed with Asian business culture, liked the idea so much that he made it mandatory in all of his stores. One thing that attracted Walton to businesses in the East was the utter devotion that employees have for their company and its founders. Employees routinely put in twice their salaried hours to impress rigid corporate leadership, a trend that business owners back in America were keen to replicate. Sam Walton's daily chant may be a cup full of concentrated cringe, but other companies take it a step further by employing another tactic of cults: language control. When employees start working at Disney theme parks, they are given a language guide.
When you get a job with the Walt Disney Company, it's not just getting a job, it's like entering a new community.
I would have already been fired because there are no employees at Disney parks. There are only cast members, and there are no customers, only guests. And employees are not at work, they are on stage. Employees are reprimanded from going off script. Disney knows that controlling the language their employees use will get them to put in extra effort around their parks. Disney is not alone. Google employees call themselves Googlers, unless they have just joined, and then they are Nooglers. Amazon employees are Amazonians, and Facebook employees are Metamates. It sounds harmless, and some people might even call it good management, but it's still mental conditioning with an objective. What's even scarier is that it works. I'm sure that you can think of a lot of jargon terms and acronyms unique to your company. Language and rituals are a big part of any culture, but in corporatism, their aim is to get employees to think of the company and their job as something bigger than just a place they go to do tasks to earn money.
For folks who want to be part of something bigger than themselves.
A workforce that thinks their company is more important than the compensation that it provides will accept lower salaries and remain more loyal than they would to a company that doesn't pull the same tricks. Google's corporate culture is legendary for free salad bars and encouraging creativity, but that's only in place to get Googlers to stay in the office longer and share their best ideas with a trillion-dollar company. Goldman Sachs' culture is to be home of the smartest, hardest-working people that want to get paid more than everyone else for being better than everyone else. But that culture lets them work their new analysts 80 hours a week a month straight because they know the culture they were signing up for. If corporate culture is starting to sound less like an annoying business buzzword and more like a horrifying trend, that was only the first reason of 4. The second reason that companies have become so obsessed with their culture is because pushback over workplace issues has become a lot more serious. Offices have become a lot more diverse and inclusive, and public opinion has shifted to support groups that previously would have been marginalized. This is positive progress, but it's not without challenges. When everybody in an office has a similar background, it's easier to avoid faux pas that will get the company in trouble. In a modern office, what is just a joke to one person will be an attack to another person.
Really uncomfortable, man.
Whoa, Kayla, slow down, Speedy. I can't wait to see us in my bedroom later.
And if you got time, why don't you swing by my bedroom, huh? We'll see whose you can get done first.
Mine's bigger.
Stop.
Mine's bigger.
You boys are gonna stretch me thin.
Okay, what the f? This is literally sexual harassment, okay? Like, how are you okay with this, Kayla?
I'm remodeling Rob's bedroom later. When I'm not here, I run a small interior design company.
The court of public opinion is very unkind to companies no matter how they handle these situations. Having a strong cultural framework in place can help reduce the chances of these events happening. Stopping bad PR and getting the most work out of the widest possible pool of talent is all the companies really care about, but that sounds too dehumanizing, so they brand it as corporate culture and everybody is happy. A company that makes a big deal about its corporate culture can also use it as a defense when problems do eventually occur. Any corporate apology is bound to include a line about how the company takes workplace culture very seriously, and it holds its people to the highest standards of whatever. This isn't a bad thing. A workplace should be somewhere everybody feels comfortable, even if it's a little more rigid than the 1950s-style Mad Men ad firm. But don't be fooled into thinking it's been done for the right reasons. A culture is only good as how much extra profit it can make for a company every year. The third reason that companies have become so obsessed with corporate culture is because everybody else is doing it and they've all convinced each other it's important. Corporate culture has been a concept in business management since the 1970s, but it has only become a buzzword in the last 10 years. The obsession with company culture began when company leaders saw the success of tech startups, and they had a very different way of doing business, but were becoming the most valuable businesses in the world. The push for positive company culture really became about chasing what worked for others. The objective of creating the best possible working environment got lost to following trends and fads that were implemented poorly.
And now the new thing in Silicon Valley is they use this a lot, which is like, I like to hire people that I want to go have a beer with. It's like, well, that's a really stupid reason to hire someone.
Office cubicles were once the definition of a depressing work environment, but now they look like heaven. Anybody that has worked in a culture-centric, collaboration-focused, open-plan office knows that it really means that you'll be working shoulder to shoulder with your coworkers on a small desk barely big enough for all of your stuff.
This is where I work. My desk is incredibly close to my poor neighbors. I always have to wear headphones to concentrate, and nobody ever talks.
The old office cubicles were better for workers, but moving to the conveniently cheaper option of cramming more staff into the same square footage can be justified by management with a focus on promoting company culture.
Open offices are about saving money.
The extra space is used for rec rooms that look great on the company's career landing page, but workers will get into trouble for using if they don't meet their performance objectives. In the age of culture obsession, a team isn't a group of overworked people who drink heavily to cope with stress. They just work hard, play hard. The employees share blame in this obsession as well. One of the most frequently recommended interview questions for applicants is to ask about company culture. 91% of hiring managers rank a good cultural fit over the applicant with the best skills, so this is good advice. But the interviewers then need a good answer. If they said that they are a boring company that sets reasonable expectation for their workers and realizes that their accounting department is not a fast-paced and dynamic environment, it would put off a lot of LinkedIn enthusiasts. The best strategy for both workers and employers is to play along with the game and pretend they care. Company culture can be good for everybody, but not if it goes too far, and it can actually hurt company and career success in 3 ways. The first problem is that it can recreate an environment where everybody is the same, even if individualism is what it was trying to promote. Sometimes good ideas are had when not everybody feels 100% comfortable, and if everybody is too in line with the homogenous culture, there won't be anybody to challenge bad ideas. Companies with strong cultures can also isolate new employees and make them feel very awkward. I am sure you have all talked to someone that was just a little bit too into their company.
And just love my job.
Now imagine working with a whole team of them. It is also a lot of pressure. Most of the stuff you do at your job does not matter. If you file a report late or enter some date wrong, it won't be the end of the world. But if you and all of the people you work with believe that the company is more important than just something that pays your bills, then every little mistake becomes the end of the world. This is terrible for the mental health of employees, but it's also terrible for the company because it disincentivizes free thinking and controlled risk-taking.
The first thing I do is ask for it. I'm just calling you out, corporate America, you.
The fourth reason that companies have become obsessed with corporate culture is because it's one of the last options they have to motivate staff that just don't care about the 40-year careers anymore. According to study after study, working from home leads to more efficient workers, less staff turnover, higher quality work, and it's cheaper for the business and its workers. So why the f do so many companies want people back into the office?
The days of working from home are fading for more employees, now being called back to the office.
Before COVID-19, high-tech companies were already experimenting with the advantages of remote work. A peer-reviewed report from an unidentified NASDAQ-listed company ran a trial where half of their call center workforce was randomly selected to work from home and the other half would remain in the office. The group given the opportunity to work from home had higher customer satisfaction, took 13% more calls, and suffered 50% less staff attrition, which is a big issue for call centers which typically struggle with high staff turnover. A follow-up study done on workers in a wider selection of roles including finance, marketing, and software development had similar results. They compared staff working full-time from the office with staff working hybrid schedules from home and the office. That study found that hybrid workers were 8% more efficient at their jobs and had turnover rates 35% lower than staff working in the office full-time. If businesses want to get the most out of their workers, the results are clear. More work from home is more better. Working from home is also cheaper for the business. Companies that want all of their workers in the office will pay more for utilities like electricity, maintenance, security, and internet that workers would happily provide themselves if they were allowed to work from home. It's rare that companies turn down better results for less money, but in this case, there are 4 reasons that more are demanding their staff come back into the office. The first reason is that a lot of companies are not doing so well right now. Interest rates are high, investors are not throwing money around like they were in 2020, and companies need to make cuts. The easiest and largest ongoing expense for most companies are their employees. If a business is getting less work than usual, laying off staff is a prudent business decision. If a business can cut expenses at the same rate as lost revenue, then it may be able to maintain profits to keep the shareholders happy. If a business is making less revenue, then it also means there's less work to do, so it just won't need as many staff. The problem is that laying off staff signals to the market that the company is struggling, which can affect the share price, make it harder to generate new business, and make it harder to hire new staff in the future. Nobody wants to work for a company that lays off a lot of people on a whim, and customers don't want to work with a company that looks like it might go out of business. What companies really need is a way to get rid of staff without formally laying them off. Business leaders have already seen the studies, and they know that forcing people to work from the office leads to higher staff turnover, which in this case is exactly what they want.
But at some point, you've got to make a decision to say, look, this is our policy. You have to return to work and be okay with the idea that some employees may say, well, if that's the case, I just can't work for this company anymore.
Investment banks like JP Morgan and Goldman Sachs, which have seen declining revenue from less corporate deal activity, are forcing all of their staff to return to the office full-time. Their official communications stress the importance of face-to-face interactions with clients and coworkers. Senior investment bankers from both firms, who love to talk about how much harder they worked when they were analysts, accidentally said the quiet part out loud when journalists contacted them about their firm's decision to bring everybody back. A senior manager at Goldman declared to the Financial Times that Goldman does not want to hire people for whom the most important thing is how many days they have to spend in the office. At the moment, this plan could backfire for businesses. Unemployment is still low, and it's easy for high-performing employees to find a new job. So managers using this tactic need to be careful or they will be left with nothing but their worst employees. An easy way to get rid of staff without the bad publicity is just the first reason. The second reason that companies want their staff back in the office, despite all the advantages that working from home offers, is that they are exposed to real estate that is becoming useless.
Everyone's saying, you got to come back to the office now. It's just like, it's all just giant propaganda to keep the commercial real estate market up.
The value of office buildings has slumped as people shift to working from home, which is a problem for the companies that have risk exposure to that market. Around 30% of major public companies in America own the office building they are headquartered in. This real estate represents a major asset on the balance sheet for those companies. Apple Park in Cupertino costs $5 billion to construct, which is a major investment even for a company like Apple. Investors pay close attention to how efficiently companies utilize their assets. A big building that is sitting empty is not doing anything to return money to shareholders, so there is pressure on company leadership to sell these assets. The problem is company executives trying to sell an office building in today's market would likely take a significant loss on the estimated value listed on the balance sheet. This loss would be considered a bad look for the CEO when it's time for the board to decide their bonus. Instead of selling an asset that's not being used and realizing the loss, a better play for the CEO is to make sure the asset is being used. If an office is full, then company leadership can justify the capital tied up in a building as it offsets the rent they would have to pay if they didn't own the building. Most major companies do rent their offices, but that can actually put even more pressure on company leadership to get people back in the office. The average rental term for office space is much longer than the average rental term for a residential home. Office spaces require fit-outs to make them ready for the companies that will be occupying them. Office space is often rented as nothing more than an empty concrete shell, and the landlord and tenant will negotiate how the office will be built out to fit the needs of the company. The typical cost to fit out a high-rise office after the core of the building has been constructed is between $250 and $500 per square foot. If managers want their offices to look like the one in Suits, it will cost even more. Usually, the building owner pays for the fit-out, so they want to ensure their corporate tenant is going to pay rent for a long time, which is why office leases last much longer than residential leases. Companies that still have their leases from before COVID will be paying money every month for something they are not using, but can't get out of. A lot of company managers have decided if they are paying for it, they might as well use it, because the cost benefit of working from home disappears if the company is still paying for an office. According to a 2022 office space report on 247 companies conducted by Robin Poward found that only 11% of companies were fully utilizing their office space. 46% of the companies surveyed were using less than half of their available office space. And another 46% of companies surveyed said that they plan to reduce office space within the next year. But that is difficult with long-term leases. One of the only options left to a lot of companies is to default on their leases to open negotiation with the building's owner. Some perfectly healthy companies have started to do this to try and get rid of a major ongoing expense. Banks are another group with significant exposure to office buildings. 3.8% of Wells Fargo loans are secured against commercial office space. This represents $37 billion in loans, or roughly a quarter of the company's market cap. Banks are under pressure to make sure that offices remain the standard working environment, or they will need to do significant write-downs if defaults continue. The third reason that companies are pushing people to come back to the office is because the power that an office can give managers.
And a lot of that has to do with employers starting to pull back, starting to say, we are still hiring, but we want you on site. We want you in place.
Some managers don't actually have that much to do besides stand over their subordinates and look important. It's easy to fill a day with redundant tasks and micromanagement in an office, but it's harder to do it online. Senior managers at companies making the decision to bring people back to the office are also going to be more comfortable with work in person than work done online. The old soft skills of business, like a firm handshake and small talk with colleagues, are less relevant online. Senior managers in the penultimate years of their career have spent most of their lives learning how important these skills are, and for many of them, it's how they got to their level to begin with. Straight-laced, old-school business managers are being confronted with a new work culture of online team meetings sat in by someone in their bathrobe and a co-worker's cat. Professional office culture is something that managers use as a powerful tool for extracting the most out of their subordinates. People stay late at the office to get extra work done, in large part because they know sitting at their desk in the dark hours after everybody else has left is a good look and demonstrates to their superiors that they are willing to make sacrifices for their career. If, on the other hand, you are someone that works from home, you won't get nearly the same recognition for working on something after hours, because you are sitting around at home in either case anyway. A large motivator for upward career advancement in the past has been the perks that come with senior management in a corporate role. If you come into work every day and sit down at a shared desk in an open-plan office that has no privacy, where you sit shoulder to shoulder with noisy colleagues, you would be willing to work extra hard for a promotion if the job gave you your own office with walls and enough room to stretch out without annoying your neighbors. According to studies by McKinsey, the Incentive Research Foundation, and Princeton, non-cash incentives have more of an impact on long-term work motivation than cash incentives. So even though we all say that we would just prefer the extra money, the science says we wouldn't. The research has presented 4 reasons why. The first reason is that non-cash incentives are easier to see. Every day you go into work, you will see an executive's private parking spot, their large office, and their personal assistant that fetches them coffee. If a company just paid that executive more money instead of offering them visible workplace perks, you would never see their big house or retirement savings, so you would be less career motivated. The second reason is that non-cash incentives are easier to talk about. If you get given your own corner office, it's easier to talk about than a large salary increase. Workers should talk about their salaries more, but there is still a taboo about it, which company management is more than happy to keep in place. So for now, people get to brag about their new office more than their big bonus. The third reason is that while people say they would prefer extra money, it quickly becomes their new normal, and the higher income level becomes their new expectation. Do you remember what your salary was 10 years ago? Probably not, but you would probably remember where you worked. The fourth reason is that people just like recognition, and even small incentives like their face on the wall for Employee of the Month goes a long way. Most of these non-cash awards need some kind of physical presence to work, and working from home quickly makes a role far more transactional and easily comparable with another role where the worker will sit behind the same desk and work the same hours just for different money. Additionally, since most of these perks go to senior managers in a business, they are more likely to want to return to work themselves and make the same decisions for everyone else. According to a study of 10,000 workers in the summer of 2021, of executives who primarily worked completely remotely throughout the pandemic, 44% said they wanted to come back into the office every day. Just 17% of their employees said the same. It's nicer to go back to a comfortable office that you oversee than it is to go back to a shared desk that gets micromanaged. Managers are also just people, and they are more reactive to negative news than positive news. A manager is more likely to remember that one employee that played video games at home all day when they should have been working than they are to remember the hours saved by cutting out commutes for their entire team, leading to small incremental improvements. When surveyed, most managers believed that working from home had a negative impact on their team's output, even though the data suggested exactly the opposite. The use of employee monitoring software has increased by 66% in the fall of 2021, and even as workers return to the office, managers have remained on average more suspicious of their subordinates. Collecting employee information and getting rid of underperforming staff is one of the reasons that companies have become obsessed with data. Jobs are not what they used to be. The average time an employee spends with their company is now at the lowest level ever, and that's by design. We have gone from full-time to part-time to casual to gig work, lowering the expectation of a long-term professional relationship every step of the way. If this didn't do enough, studies have shown that many workplaces are now intentionally promoting the fear of job losses in an attempt to motivate workers and keep costs down. But this is usually a really dumb idea. The death of job security is bad for workers and bad for companies, but nobody cares anymore.
So we have immediately seen, Andrew, layoffs. We have seen price increases, so that's inflation.
Teachers and staff at schools from coast to coast could soon be out of the job.
15 million new jobs in just 3 years, a record.
Mr. Musk said the company would look to reduce headcount by around 10%.
The layoffs are already piling up this year, and we're just a few weeks into 2024.
Up until the 1980s, it wasn't unusual for workers to spend their entire professional careers working with just one company. Company loyalty was highly valued by both employers and employees, and the threat of getting laid off or fired was incredibly low. If you ever watch old films and see someone getting fired as a major plot point, just remember it actually was a big deal back then.
Third prize is you're fired.
But according to data from the Bureau of Labor Statistics, those days are long gone. The average tenure of young employees these days is less than a third of the baby boomers exiting the workforce. I don't want to sound too old here, but back in my day, people actually cared about losing their job. But today, getting fired or laid off from your company just makes good content to post on TikTok. This is a bad trend for companies, because it takes away their biggest stick. The fear of getting fired is always going to be a motivator in the workplace. There really is no way around that. If you don't do your job or cause too much trouble for the company, you are going to lose your job along with the pay and benefits that come with it. But as the great Peter Gibbons would say, that will only make someone work just hard enough to not get fired. The death of job security means that people just expect to lose their job at some point in their career these days. But there are 3 big reasons why it was allowed to get this bad, and 3 reasons why nobody really cares anymore. The first reason is that companies give up on training their own staff. There is an old joke about company staffing that goes something like this. The CEO and head of HR are arguing about the cost to train staff. The CEO asks, "What would happen if we spent all this money and they quit?" To which the head of HR responds, "What happened if we don't spend the money and they stay?" But as more people move jobs more often, the CEO's argument is actually starting to make sense. Research conducted by Peter Capelli, the director of the Wharton School's Center for Human Resources, found that the time and money spent on staff training within companies has fallen drastically. In 1979, the average worker received 2.5 weeks on the job training every single year. By 2004, it was just 11 hours, and most of that was safety training, not developing new skills. A more recent follow-up survey conducted by the same team in 2011 found that only 1/5 of workers received any on-the-job training at all within the last year. Companies don't want to train people because they are leaving their jobs more frequently than they used to, so they are only willing to hire employees that are already able to do the job. Standardized systems have made this a lot easier for them to do. If you are a professional office worker, it's almost a prerequisite to have a basic proficiency in Microsoft Office, especially Excel. And every profession now has its own industry standard productivity programs. If you are a creative, you use Adobe Suite. If you are in sales, you use HubSpot or a comparable CRM. And if you're in marketing, you need to know your way around a box of crayons. Oh, and the advertising analytics backend of Google, Meta, and LinkedIn. Since these skills have become the standard for all employees, companies can hire people that are already ready to work on day one, where in the past, they would need a lengthy training program on the unique in-house systems of that particular company. But standardized programs have also meant that people can find a new job that they are qualified for with less barriers, which means they switch jobs more often, which means companies invest less into training unloyal staff, which creates even more need for industry standard systems. The ultimate incarnation of this trend is platform-based gig work. The professional relationship for this kind of work lasts as long as the app is running, and writers often work between multiple apps at the same time to maximize earning and minimize downtime. If you want to get ahead in a professional career these days, I'm sorry to tell you, but you are going to have to invest some of your own time and money into training yourself, even if it's just to tick a meaningless qualification box. Companies aren't going to train you anymore, which means if you quit or get laid off, it's not as big of a deal for either party. But the decline of on-job training is just the first reason. The death of job security is bad news for companies, even if they were the ones that caused it. The simple fact is that when you get a new job, you aren't going to be very good at what you do until you learn your new role. Standardized systems have made it easier to transfer basic competencies between companies, but even little things like who you talk to about authorizing your expense reports, the names and faces of clients, or how the office printer works, they all take time for new people to learn. According to a study conducted by Gallup, a business analytics company, it takes the average employee 12 months before they reach their full performance potential in their new role. Other studies have suggested that new employees are not fully autonomous in their responsibilities for the first 18 months of their employment. If new entrants into the job market are only spending 3 years in their jobs on average, that means they are going to be spending a third of their career just getting up to speed in their new role. That means a loss in productivity for the companies they work for, right? Wrong. Worker productivity is actually at all-time highs, so that begs the question, is this in spite of lower job security or because of it? The second reason that job security has been dying is that it's a great motivation tool. If the fear of losing your job is only enough to motivate you to do the bare minimum to avoid that tap on the shoulder, then you should know that companies have responded by moving those goalposts. A study conducted by economists at Manchester and Cardiff University looked at the motivating factor of what they called manufactured job uncertainty. In this report, researchers tried to work out why fears of job security was going up, even when the rates of people being fired from full-time positions was stable. They did this by comparing companies in America and the UK, who are very happy to lay people off to appease shareholders, to companies in Japan, which has a strong culture of never firing people. A small tangent, but Japanese businesses actually take firing people so seriously that they have an alternative practice called oidashibeya, but this loosely translates to workers' purgatory. According to Japan Intercultural Consulting, a firm that advises businesses operating in the Japanese market, workers' purgatory happens when an employee chronically underperforms in their role. Instead of getting fired, they are typically placed in a room, often windowless, where they have nothing to do. In many cases, their business cards are taken away, and they are forced to do menial, mind-numbing tasks or given nothing to do at all. So yeah, Japanese companies would rather put their workers in solitary confinement than fire them, making them a pretty good contrast to companies in America and the UK. What the economists found was that even when job tenure wasn't actually being reduced by layoffs or firings, changes to corporate control and especially company mergers or acquisitions raised uncertainty. Companies noticed that by hyping up this uncertainty and making workers compete against each other to maintain their position in a theoretical downsizing, they could get people to work harder. Companies doing this would rank the performance of their teams and compare them to one another, highlight staff errors, and downplay strong performers so that managers and their teams always felt like their job was at risk. The Japanese firms, despite actually having shorter tenures for managers and operating with more business uncertainty thanks to a weaker overall economy, had a higher sense of job security, mainly thanks to a culture of protecting workers even at the expense of shareholders. In a wonderful twist of fate, though, the study also found that this is not really working on younger employees. Decades of well-publicized layoffs means that younger managers have no expectation of job security and aren't afraid of losing their jobs as much as older managers who come from a time when people could spend their entire careers with one company. The rank and yank strategy only works to boost productivity for so long. A company should get rid of bad employees, But if it makes everybody feel on edge about their jobs forever, then even the best employees are just going to look for better opportunities elsewhere. Younger workers have also realized that changing jobs more frequently, especially early in their career, is the best way to move up the corporate ladder and secure pay increases. I will say it in every video I can, but if you want to increase your earnings in your career, multiple studies suggest that the best way to do this is to change jobs roughly every 2 years, and always be on the lookout for better opportunities. Companies do not value staff loyalty anymore, because they can't. And that's the third reason why job security is dying. It costs businesses a lot of money to hire new employees, and then more money to pay them while they're getting good at their job. If they are hiring externally for a more senior position, they will also need to pay that new hire more than an internal promotion. So if it makes no sense, then why do companies keep doing this? Well, it's easier. An internal promotion means someone else needs to be promoted to fill that person's position, and someone else needs to be promoted to fill theirs. Now, instead of your company having 1 employee in a new job, it has 5. Hiring managers could do this, or they could just hire an external candidate that already knows the systems and then get back to scrolling Reddit in their office. Workers also don't believe in job stability either. Things like employee pension plans and career development are all the responsibility of the worker now, and if they are accepting that responsibility, they also want the freedom that comes with it. Some companies like consulting, legal, and accounting firms have built their entire workforce around limited-time employees. Overworked, underpaid graduates will stick it out in entry-level roles because they know it looks good on the resume when they apply for a real job in 2 years. Companies can attract high-performing workers by bragging about how secure they are. Even companies that were considered American institutions have fallen apart too many times for people to think that their job is secure. And job security isn't a selling point worth taking a job for because people have learned not to care. So, congratulations, corporate America, you kind of played yourself. It's a classic gripe of out-of-touch corporate executives hiring minimum wage workers or the trust fund baby who is angry that their gym is busy in the middle of the day. Nobody wants to work anymore. Now, I really hate to say this, but by looking at the numbers, they might have a point. Labor force participation is approaching generational lows even after the pandemic, while labor force participation amongst men specifically is the lowest it has ever been. These declines have been happening at the same time that unemployment is theoretically quite low, which, if the economists are to be believed, means it should be easy for people who want to get a job to get a job, right? Well, not quite. And these numbers are confusing at best, or downright misleading at worst.
Is people just don't want to go to work.
There was a poll I read a long time ago. Only like 18% of Americans feel engaged when they're at work.
I hate my job!
The signs are everywhere. Businesses, especially restaurants, need employees and they need them now.
Dude, less than 20% of the country likes their f***ing job.
Okay, so there are 2 general schools that people fall into when they see that nobody wants to work anymore. The first group are wealthy executives, business owners, or just people who have always worked incredibly hard who don't like that jobs are going unfilled. So they blame it on lazy young people who would rather sit around all day smoking cones and watching skibbity toilets. The second school of thought agrees that yes, people don't want to work. They don't want to work demeaning jobs where they won't get paid enough to support a decent quality of life. It's nice when 2 groups who are so different can agree on something. So really, the only thing left is to work out why people don't want to work. Now, in most cases, the jobs that nobody wants to work fall into one of 3 categories. The first are jobs that are just paying well below market rates given the experience or the location required. Businesses aren't going to be able to fill a full-stack senior development role in Silicon Valley for $50,000 a year plus equity in their questionable pre-seed startup, but there are still plenty that try. Even entry-level jobs that pay minimum wage in very high cost of living areas are going to be much harder to fill in a city where even finance bros are living in shared housing. Now, hot take alert. But just like there are no shortage of crappy businesses and managers that expect to pay workers nothing for world-class skills and experience, there are lots of workers who expect world-class pay with little or no marketable expertise. One of the most insightful pieces of data on this issue is this recent survey right here. It asked a selection of Americans what they considered to be the minimum salary they would need to be financially successful. Now, most of the responses to these numbers have been laughing at the Gen Zs just entering the workforce who think that almost $600,000 a year is a realistic salary goal. Because for most people, it just isn't. Unless you are in a few very specific career paths, there are basically no jobs that pay this money. And even then, you need an insane amount of luck to get those opportunities. Now, you can blame this on young people who don't really know how the world works yet, or social media that makes it look like every hustle bro is flying private, but it's all distracting from a more interesting data point. The average boomer thinks financial success is achieved with a salary of just under $100,000. According to the Bureau of Labor Statistics, this is still almost double the median national salary. But in most major cities where people can actually find jobs that pay this much, $100,000 certainly doesn't afford a lifestyle of financial success. There is simply a massive gap in expectations between the generations looking for their first jobs and the group responsible for giving out most of the jobs, so they both agree that nobody wants to work, just for different reasons. The second type of job that nobody wants to work are in workplaces that push their staff, demand unreasonable overtime, or have management that are needlessly abusive. This happens in a shocking amount of businesses across the country, and even if you are lucky enough to avoid a boss that thinks shouting is an effective motivation tool, you have probably worked some overtime out of fear of losing your job or being reprimanded. According to a 2023 workplace survey, the average full-time worker across the country studied is now putting in an average of 9.2 hours of unpaid overtime. These jobs often don't have much trouble finding people to start, but they do struggle with high staff turnover. The third are simply jobs that never actually existed. You probably all know about ghost jobs by now, but even if you really do want to work, there is a good chance that most of your applications are just going to build out a workforce database, not to actually be considered for employment. Now, whatever the specific reason, the results are the same. Less people end up working. But aside from settling some beef between entitled Zoomers and some out-of-touch boomers, this data all reveals something more concerning about work in the current economy. It's not that people don't want to work anymore. They simply can't afford to. Okay, so yeah, there are millions of people out there that think nobody wants to work because they couldn't hire someone with 20 years of experience on a programming language that has only been out for 5 years for $15 an hour. There are also people who don't want to work because they think unless they are offered 6 figures in their first role out of high school, it's not worth their time, and they would be better off sitting at home working on their NFT dropshipping business. Both of these groups definitely exist in shockingly large numbers, but even though it's really fun to make fun of both sides, it distracts from the much more important reason why labor force participation is getting worse. Well, as you might have been able to guess, this trend is really being driven by specific age groups and specific locations. If you look at labor force participation and exclude the youngest generation of workers and the oldest generation of workers, it's actually approaching all-time highs, which really makes sense when you think about it. It's common for both men and women to work full-time these days, and for most households, it's simply a financial necessity. So yeah, even if people don't want to work anymore, they kind of are stuck doing it anyway. The reason labor force participation has fallen off in general, though, is because the average is being dragged down by a lot of young workers and old workers. The old workers are the easiest to explain. As people started living longer, retirement ages were pushed back, and more of the population began working in non-physical jobs. As a result, a larger share of the population over 55 remained in the workforce. This has started to reverse though, as self-funded retirement systems and general asset prices have allowed a lot of over 55s to step back from the labor force, especially after COVID, as a lot of people received severance packages and decided that an early retirement was better than going back to the office. Labor force participation from young people just entering the workforce either out of high school or college is also pulling down the average, just for different reasons. More people than ever are getting a college degree, which means they are starting to work later, and fewer people are working part-time jobs while they study because for many, it's simply not worth it given how much debt they are going to be in when they graduate anyway. This might not also be a shock to you, but it's getting really damn hard to find a job out of college. A few months ago, a post from a professor at Berkeley made the rounds after it spoke about his top students from a top college struggling to find work in technology, an industry that was hiring highly intelligent graduates like this as fast as they could make them just 24 months ago. Previously, a Berkeley CS graduate, even if not a top student, would receive multiple appealing job offers in terms of work type, location, salary, and employer. However, outstanding students, like those with a 4.0 in major GPA, are now contacting me worried because they have zero offers. I suspect this trend is irreversible and likely part of the broader trend impacting almost every employment sector. It's pretty grim stuff coming out of one of the best schools in the country. It might not be the most logical thing to do, but a common reaction from people who can't land a job with a degree they got to make them more employable is to just go get another degree. The rate of master's and PhD recipients has grown even faster than people getting an undergraduate degree, because that's now normal to stand out in a highly competitive job market. And to be honest, it's a nice way for people to avoid the reality of the job market for another few years. Spending another 2 to 8 years at college to get advanced degrees means people aren't in the labor force, which pulls down the average to look worse than it really is. So those are the ages that are perpetuating this dumb myth. But this trend is also highly dependent on location. And to see that, you need to go to the place where apparently the absolute least amount of people want to work. Yes, the Rust Belt state has the lowest labor force participation in the country, but also some of the most unusual statistical anomalies. The state is quite poor after its major industries like coal mining and manufacturing were either outsourced or simply fell out of widespread use. This means that a lot of areas have effectively been left behind with no major employment opportunities, meaning that labor force participation is much lower than the national average. But strangely, in some areas, the participation rate is much higher than what would be expected. A recent study conducted by economists from Hamline University, Cornell, and Virginia Tech found that depending on the county, labor force participation in West Virginia ranges from 42% to 77%, a gap between regions of 35%, while the average across the US states is just 17%, less than half of West Virginia. It's not unusual that cities and working towns will have higher labor force participation than other areas, because people often specifically move to these locations just to get work. But this variance was startling and uncovered a bigger national trend. The people in areas that still had work can't afford not to work, and the people in areas with no work couldn't afford to move to areas with work, since it could mean giving up family support networks or simply paying for the cost to relocate housing. A lot of people who had the financial means have already moved out of the state, only making this problem worse, as they take business opportunities and money away with them. It's a dense read because it's an academic paper. It's for nerds. But if you ever feel compelled to say that nobody wants to work anymore, I definitely suggest you have a look at it. The report itself also looks at welfare issues specific to West Virginia. But just because the state is experiencing this problem the worst doesn't mean that it's in any way just something hurting them. The trend of a few concentrated cities doing extremely well while everywhere else stagnates can make nationwide figures look good. But it also means people who want to work have an option of trying their luck for one of the few jobs left in areas with fewer opportunities, or living in an extremely expensive city to compete with everybody else fighting over a spot in the few places left where people can reliably get ahead. There are 8.2 million job openings in America right now, and around 7 million people actively looking for a job. There are also millions of Americans who have simply given up on even trying to look for a job. But still, companies are complaining that they can't get the people they need. There is one reason that has been used time and time again to explain all of this.
A range of companies are looking at how to close the skills gap.
Just the skill gap.
The skills gap.
Yep, the skills gap. There are people looking for work and jobs on offer, but the skills of those people and the requirements of the jobs just don't line up. It's a simple, elegant explanation to a major problem, but it's also almost entirely made up.
20-year-old Jesus Villegas is in the second year of his training. He's building a career in advanced construction technology.
Today's incomes gap is largely a skills gap.
87% of Americans said that they are going to need to get skills and new training throughout their work life. It's really remarkable.
The skills gap, also known as the skill shortage, or just good old structural unemployment, is a convenient excuse for a lot of major issues in today's job market that are often swept under the rug by businesses, politicians, and even economic statistics. If a hospital is hiring a doctor, but the only person in town looking for a job has a degree in computer science, then obviously that role is not going to be filled regardless of how much time and effort the applicant has put into their education. The argument that you would have seen is that this same problem is playing out everywhere across the world, which is why even if companies claim to be desperate to hire people, you might struggle to find a job. The whole argument conveniently shifts the blame of any labor market problems onto the workers because they're the ones that haven't trained the right skills or developed the right experience. The first problem with this idea, though, is how the problem of the skills gap quietly slips away during the good times. Research published by economists from Harvard, Northern University, and the Federal Reserve found a striking relationship between unemployment and the experience that employers look for in their candidates. The team collected data on over 36 million job postings over 3 years, and what they found was that the skills and experience required was almost directly proportional to the unemployment rate. In plain English, what this meant was that when there were lots of people looking for a job, all of a sudden the skills requirement for roles became a lot higher, and this is when people will start complaining about a skills gap. But when unemployment is lower and there aren't that many people applying for jobs, suddenly the skills gap isn't such a big problem and companies are happy to hire whoever they can get. Now, as long as they aren't discriminating based on protected classes, companies can basically hire whoever they want and ask for whatever skills they can. If unemployment is high and they can be greedy with their job requirements, that's just business. But the problem is, the myth of the skills gap is used to justify a lot of bad stuff. The first is simply lower wages. If companies post a position with high skill requirements and they don't get any applicants that meet their unreasonably high bar, they can go back to the best applicant with a lower salary and benefit offer than advertised, pointing out the gaps in their skills as a reason for the lower offer. This is just basic salary negotiation tactics. But the myth of the skills gap makes it easier for companies to get away with this. A report by MIT found that most jobs advertised in America asked for skills like programming that were actually not required to perform the job. They looked specifically at IT help desk technicians that deal with computers, so most companies ask for programming skills. The thing is, though, most IT help desk techs don't actually use programming for anything. But a lot of companies just assume that computers equal code, and so make it a job requirement. The report actually found that programming was just as useful in manufacturing plants as it was in IT help desk work. But factory machine operators were far more likely to get on-the-job training on how to program their machines than IT workers who were just assumed to know how to code. But lower wages are far from the worst thing that the myth of the skills gap has been used to push for. It's also been an incredible tool for lobbying on migration policy, education funding, and workplace protections. These are worth looking at one by one, because you are probably going to start hearing a lot of familiar sound bites. If there was actually a supply of good-paying jobs available to people that were going unfilled because of the skills gap, then the traditional market assumption would be that people would retrain to fill those roles to increase their income and job security. But that isn't happening because there are problems with every part of this assumption. The first problem is that a lot of the jobs we have a skills gap for here in America don't actually pay that well. According to a report by the Society of Resource Management, the hardest roles to fill currently include jobs like nursing, teaching, the trades, and social service work. Most jobs in these roles do not pay enough to support a comfortable life in a major city, especially for entry-level employees into the roles. The trades can be great, but apprentice tradesmen are not going to earn much until they are fully qualified, and even then, they need to work significant overtime or own their own business to make a comfortable salary in most parts of the country. Even still, they are going to be better off than teachers and nurses who not only need a college degree where they won't be paid anything, they also need on-the-job training before they are earning anything at all. That's on top of reports about extreme job stress, brutal work schedules, and the general lack of respect these roles receive. Putting your career on hold, spending tens of thousands of dollars on a college degree, and dealing with difficult patients or often dangerous patients or children is not that enticing to Americans who would consider a career switch because the income for these roles hasn't risen in line with the demand gap. There is not a skills shortage. There is just a shortage of people who want to do difficult jobs for bad pay. People in these roles who already have the skills to perform the job at a high level are leaving because it's just not worth making the sacrifices necessary when there are easier jobs that pay just as much or more. A counterexample to this trend was the rush to train computer science. The tech industry in the 2000s was expanding rapidly, and we didn't have enough coders to perform roles that actually needed programming skills. The allure of high-paying, respected jobs with a good work-life balance meant a lot of very smart people moved into that career path to fill the skills gap because there was a real reward for doing so. Now, there are actually too many qualified programmers, and as the tech industry has cooled down, hundreds of thousands of people have been laid off. Just 5 years ago, though, they would have been told that there isn't enough programmers, and companies are hiring whoever they can as fast as they can. So the assumption that empty jobs are just waiting to be filled and the only thing standing in the way is the skills gap can be a bit dangerous. But the final piece of the puzzle is how profitable fixing this myth can be. Politicians can win some easy political points by talking about retraining programs, and companies can push the responsibility of staff training onto their workers or those government programs. The market research firm Allied Market Research values the corporate training market at over $361 billion, with it projected to grow to over $800 billion by 2035. That's a major industry just by itself, and it relies heavily on people believing that they are just one qualification away from landing a job that is just desperate to find the right worker. This industry is separate from traditional colleges and trade schools, but you already know what a mess that whole thing is. The skills gap has been a major lobbying tool by companies to push for this kind of training. Siemens, an industrial equipment manufacturer, paid for an article in The Atlantic talking directly to policymakers that the apprenticeships were the secret to closing the skills gap. Apprenticeships are actually great, but the reason that Siemens was paying to publish this article is that it would give them a new pool of skilled workers to pick from, not because they wanted to help out with labor force policies. And this is where you get to the most controversial part of the skills gap. It's used to justify immigration. Now, this is obviously a heated topic that everybody has their own set of opinions on, but it is possible to advocate for more careful and deliberate immigration policies without going full, they took our jobs. The skills gap has been used to push for a lot of skilled migration, which has arguably gone too far in America, but has been even more obvious in places like Canada, the UK, Australia, Germany, and New Zealand. The reason companies like this is because it lets them fill roles without putting upward pressure on salaries, and more people means more customers to sell products to. If the skills gap is front and center around these sensitive issues, it makes it easier for policy to be hand-waved through as an essential measure to keep the country functioning. Here in America, H-1B and EB-3 skilled working visas are the most common way to get in workers who fill skilled roles that can't be filled by an American. They come with a strict set of rules to make sure that American workers are not disadvantaged by new foreign hires. But if job requirements are kept unreasonably high to make an artificial skills gap, it becomes easier to hire workers from overseas who will be dependent on that company's sponsorship to stay in America. Who do you think is more likely to be a loyal employee? There are 9.6 million job openings in America right now, and businesses are desperate to fill roles that have now been empty for months. But at the same time, you are reading endless articles about people who have applied to thousands of jobs and haven't heard anything back from companies that were supposed to be desperate for workers. So if there are so many job opportunities, then why can't anybody get a job?
But now a new report shows that some employers are spending millions just to tell people
Restaurants and different stores are offering incentives to get people hired because they are forced to close.
We've featured is desperate
just not
to
enough
hire
workers to meet all the jobs here.
According to the U.S. Bureau of Labor Statistics, there are currently 9.6 million job openings in America and only 6.5 million unemployed people. So why not just take the openings that desperately need workers and give them to the people that desperately need jobs? Well, it's not that simple, and there are two reasons why companies are struggling to fill roles even when so many people are looking for a job, and two equally important reasons why people can't find a job even when so many companies are looking for workers. The first reason why people can't find jobs even when companies have so many open positions is because it's easier for a company to look desperate than it is for a human to. According to the Congressional Research Service, the number of job openings is calculated using a survey of 20,000 business establishments on the last day of the month to assess if a job opening exists. According to the informational guidelines, a job opening only has to meet 3 criteria to be counted. First, a specific position exists and there is work available for that position. Second, the job could start within 30 days. And third, the establishment is actively recruiting outside workers. There are companies that are constantly advertising job openings for positions that are hard to fill or are subject to high turnover. Last year, Engadget, a technology newspaper, received a leaked internal report from Amazon which revealed that the company had a staff turnover rate of 150%. That means Amazon, which has 1.6 million employees, was hiring 2.4 million people every year just to maintain its workforce. In the same year, only 1/3 of Amazon's new hires stayed with the company for longer than 90 days before quitting, getting fired, or getting laid off. With that much turnover, the company doesn't bother to remove job listings once someone gets hired to fill a role. Warehouse staff are continuously being onboarded and offboarded at almost the same rate, so hundreds of thousands of positions stay open across the country. Amazon's turnover figures were bad, but other large employers like big box retailers, delivery companies, and warehouses use the same job advertising process. These posts are mainly for low-skilled positions with equally low pay. But even if you are someone looking for a position with higher prerequisites, these numbers can still be deceiving. Amazon's hiring practices for some of their best paid and most attractive job opportunities also showed how easy it was for job opening numbers to paint the wrong picture. Another Amazon internal document reviewed by Business Insider revealed that the company's web services utility computing team posted 25,000 job openings in 2022, but only 7,800 of these positions were actually approved to be filled. This also happened in a year that Amazon was laying off more staff than they were hiring. The strategy that these companies and hiring managers are using is to constantly have positions open to attract top talent. If anybody that is not overqualified for these positions applies to them, they just get rejected. Amazon is not the only company that does this. Most of the top tech, finance, and consulting companies do exactly the same thing. Amazon is just not as good as keeping internal documents from the press. As private companies, they are not doing anything illegal, and they only do it because it does work. But it makes the number of job openings you hear companies complaining about in the media very inaccurate.
Affectionately known as JOLTS, number 9,610,000, that best estimates, and it is the best level going back to May when it was slightly higher at 9,616,000.
Compare that to the number of people looking for work. Job openings outnumbered unemployed people, but the gap is shrinking, and it's much easier to count a job opening than count as unemployed. The 6.5 million people unemployed only get counted if they do not have a job, have actively looked for work in the prior 4 weeks, and are currently available for work. According to data published by the Bureau of Labor Statistics, there are an additional 5.4 million people who want a job but are not counted as unemployed because they don't meet these technical requirements. So even though you might think it's the best time ever to get a job, the numbers are misleading, and that's just the first reason. There are much bigger problems than just the numbers. If you have been lucky enough to secure it full-time, working from home will have radically reshaped your career in more ways than you realize. Full-time working from home means that you can find lucrative job opportunities anywhere, and companies that want to keep up in the job market need to play catch-up. One strategy that has become common is to post the same job in every major city, so there's more chances for applicants across the country to see it, which lets the company be more selective with who they hire since they don't need to come into the office anyway. This can be a win-win for the employer and the employee. But for someone looking for a job, it can make it look like there are a lot more opportunities than there really are. And that's the second reason why nobody can find a job even when companies are apparently desperate to hire anybody. People are chasing ghost jobs. The job market is in a really weird place right now. People are unwilling to accept lousy salaries after being spoiled for the last 3 years, and companies are not willing to pay as much as they were because they can't. Major companies overhired during the pandemic and are now getting pressure from their investors to cut headcount and only focus on revenue-generating projects. According to a study conducted by the Harvard Business Review, this turmoil has increased the number of ghost jobs, which are jobs that are advertised that companies have no intention of ever filling. Companies do this for 3 reasons. The first is to just build up a database of talent. In the information age, having lots of data about thousands of workers in your industry is worth millions of dollars. If you are a hiring manager and a position in your company ever does really need to be filled, you can just go to your database of people that have previously applied for a job and start calling the most promising applicants. You might have to poach people from their current job if they did end up finding work, but that can still be cheaper than starting a search from scratch after the company realizes it needs a position filled. It's also useful business intelligence that is close to free to collect. By slowly sponging up thousands of applicants to do jobs that don't exist, the company can get insights on how many staff their competitors have, how much they are paying them, how many of them are leaving, and what skills they have and do not have. For the price of a job post on LinkedIn and Indeed, it's a lot of information. According to a survey of 1,000 hiring managers conducted by Clarify Capital, more than 60% of job postings have been active for more than 2 months, despite 96% of employees claiming they're actively trying to fill an open role quickly in the job advertisement. Posting ghost jobs is also used by managers who don't want to pay more for employees, but want to keep their existing overworked employees happy with the promise that new team members will be starting as soon as they find the right person. Posting ghost jobs also looks good to investors and customers because it looks like the business is growing even when it's not. It's a super effective management strategy for business, but it means job hunters can spend hundreds of hours applying for jobs and attending interviews for roles that never really existed. Now, it's much harder to feel sorry for them, but companies have become a victim of this new career paradigm as well. The first reason that companies can no longer find workers, even though millions of Americans are looking for a job, is because they have made it pointless to hire the right people. Businesses have embraced new technologies that have made it easier than ever to train people for a new role. A job like a pharmacist or bank manager used to be highly respected positions that required decades of experience and paid as well as doctors and lawyers. A pharmacist needed to know compounding formulas for prescriptions, and a bank manager needed to make discretionary decisions about who to lend money to. These were big jobs that could cost lots of money or worse if not done right. Once a company found people that were good at the jobs, it was very important to keep them for as long as possible. So it wasn't unusual for people to spend their entire career with just one company and be rewarded handsomely for it. Today, pharmacists are just there for compliance and to pull pre-made scripts the computer tells them to. Bank managers use credit scores and computer algorithms to approve or deny loans. They personally have no say in whether you get a home loan or not. This made their jobs easier, but it also made them easier to replace. So companies stopped valuing company loyalty, and they stopped rewarding it. Now it's people that don't switch jobs that are being left behind. People that switch jobs every 2 years or more, on average, earn 50% more than their peers that stay loyal to a company. The result is that people have learned to switch jobs more often. But now, companies do not want to invest any money into training new employees because they know they are not likely to stay around for very long. If companies don't want to pay for training, they need to hire people that are already skilled enough to do the role they are hiring for, but that can be hard to find. A lot of employees today are being forced to take it upon themselves to seek out skills and qualifications to remain employable through things like Excel courses, coding boot camps, sales trainings, and now AI seminars. This is on top of a growing number of jobs that now require advanced college degrees like an MBA for an entry-level analyst role. If companies can keep their standards high and still fill the roles they need, then they will win by not having to pay for staff training. If they can't, then they still win because they get to complain about how it's too hard to find workers with the right skills. Some companies can use this to justify outsourcing or hired skilled H-1B visa workers which depend on their employer to stay in America. If people working in America on an H-1B visa lose their job, they only have 60 days to find a new job at another company that is willing to sponsor their visa before they get deported. So companies have an incentive to make it look like they can't find anybody with the right skills so they can hire workers which are much more dependent on their job. It's a broken system that's bad for American workers and bad for visa holders, but it's great for companies that want loyal workers while everybody is shopping around for better deals. One thing that you have to remember about this whole situation is that companies do not want to admit that they can't find enough staff unless there is something in it for them. Signaling to investors that growth or operations could be hurt by personnel challenges will hurt a company's stock price. So a CEO has a fiduciary duty to keep that sort of information discreet, unless it can be used to benefit the company some other way. The second reason why companies can't get anybody to work for them, even when everybody wants a job, is because more skilled people than ever are choosing to work for themselves. Over 5 million businesses were created in America last year, up from just 3.5 million before the pandemic. There are more opportunities than ever to work for yourself thanks to platforms like Etsy, Amazon, eBay, Uber, Fiverr, and YouTube. These businesses are risky, but more people than ever are willing to take that risk if it means they don't have to sit through 10 job interviews for a position that didn't exist in the first place. LinkedIn is one of the strangest social media platforms in existence. Where else can you find people bragging about working unpaid overtime and writing appreciation posts to the company that just laid them off? It's a really weird website, but is it hurting your career?
I learned the value of, if it's good for the company, then it's good for me. There are so many values I learned while working at this company. Hashtag proud to be unemployed.
LinkedIn is a strange place where people talk at length about how great they are at their job to look enticing to potential future employers.
LinkedIn to me is like this weird cesspool of corporate culture that feels like corporate culture, but from the perspective of its high school.
In 2006, when the company was founded, it was a strange concept, but it has worked for LinkedIn, which is now the 9th largest social media platform in the world. It had more monthly users than Twitter before both sites were acquired. Elon Musk and a team of investors purchased Twitter for $44 billion in October 2022, a record sum for a social media company being taken private. Musk's controversial purchase beat LinkedIn's record from 2016 when it was taken private by Microsoft for $26.2 billion. Musk is often criticized for overpaying for Twitter when LinkedIn is the comparison. At the time of acquisition, LinkedIn had slightly more monthly users than Twitter, but also had something that the Bluebird just couldn't match. Every time you log into LinkedIn, you are giving Microsoft something unmatched by every other social media network in existence: value. If you are using a service for free, you are the product, and LinkedIn users are the most valuable product of them all. LinkedIn generated revenue of $13.8 billion in 2022, which is 2.5 times higher than Twitter's highest year of revenue ever. We don't have public financials on it now since it's a private company, but most analysts expect that Twitter's revenue is down since Musk's acquisition. The average LinkedIn user is worth 76 times more than the average Reddit user, 35 times more than the average Pinterest user, 4 times as much as the average YouTube viewer, and 3 times as much as the average Facebook user. This comparison is not 100% fair either. Users who log onto Reddit, Pinterest, YouTube, or Facebook spend a lot more time on the platform on average. Additionally, a site like YouTube is much more expensive to operate than LinkedIn, given the inherent differences in the cost of hosting HD videos and hosting content that is just text and pictures. LinkedIn is able to extract revenue from their users at the highest rate per hour in the industry, and when you are the product, that value is coming from you. LinkedIn achieves this in 4 ways. The first is by creating a digital marketplace for people. LinkedIn is the biggest job search site in the world. Companies and recruiters can post job listings and boost their visibility by paying LinkedIn directly. When you apply for a job through LinkedIn, the employer gets your skills, experience, education, and employment history on display in a consistent format, which is a big advantage over normal job search sites like Indeed. This information should be on your resume, but the standardized way that LinkedIn presents it lets recruiters automate their candidate searches far more easily. A subscription to LinkedIn Recruiter costs $9,000 a year, but it offers hiring managers and third-party recruiters a range of tools to search for candidates based on criteria, reach out to them directly, and advertise new roles. It's a small price to pay for most companies, because what they get in return is a buffet of potential applicants for their jobs. When you ask for a raise and give your manager the ultimatum of quitting, they weight up the expense of giving you a raise with the expense of replacing you. Finding qualified candidates used to be much harder than it is today, but now, if you quit, they are just a few keywords away from finding a perfect replacement from the largest collection of career-focused people in the world. Hiring managers would not pay $9,000 a year for tools that didn't provide a return on investment. Having the tools to reach out to potential applicants that aren't even actively looking for a job has given hiring managers a lot of power over you. And that's just the first reason. The second way LinkedIn is ruining your career is by creating an imbalance of information between you and potential employers.
LinkedIn is actually one of those things that's becoming more and more required, more and more requested on every single job application, and that is a big problem. And the main reason is LinkedIn just makes it way too easy to give too much information about yourself.
A good LinkedIn profile should have all of the information an employer would ever want to know about you. But company pages don't have any of the information you really want to know about a potential employer. Salary information is often not shared, and job expectations are kept as vague as every other site. LinkedIn is giving companies a database of employee information for nothing in return. There are some careers that require a higher level of sacrifice than others, and you should know that before going into them. If you want to work as a corporate lawyer or investment banker, you need to accept that you will need to put in long weeks and have little personal time in the first few years of your career. The same sacrifices are made by doctors who suffer through years of medical school and residency, but in exchange, they get a career path with a certainty of high compensation. It's not fair that you be expected to work like these people if you don't have the opportunity to make the same money as them. And that's the third way that LinkedIn is ruining your career, which is also one of the company's most lucrative revenue streams. It forces self-comparison. It's well known that overconsumption of social media is bad for your mental health, because it forces you to compare your everyday self with carefully curated posts by friends and influencers at their very best. Instagram will make you self-conscious about not hitting the gym for 3 hours every day, but LinkedIn will make you self-conscious about your career. Career coaches recommend that you make as many connections on LinkedIn as possible, because it expands your network and makes your profile more visible. I personally have over 1,000 connections on LinkedIn from my time in investment banking, because in the last years of my career, connecting on LinkedIn became more common than handing over a business card. My feed is now filled every day with thinly disguised brags about how someone became the youngest partner ever at their law firm, or someone else was thankful to have the honor to coordinate the synergistic digitization sprint for internal tools development, enabling their company to pivot to fields of disruptive innovation while empowering the customer experience. According to the company's own data, only 1% of monthly users post anything on the site, compared to around 20% of users who make at least one post a month on Facebook. People don't post their bad hair days on Facebook, and they won't post their career failures on LinkedIn, which can give you, as an observer, the impression that everybody is doing much better than you are.
And who can blame them? I mean, everybody on LinkedIn is essentially a saint, according to them.
LinkedIn and the marketing teams that leverage the platform know that this insecurity is one of the best ways to sell products. If you are feeling insecure about your career, you are going to be more receptive to ads selling services like career development training, leads generation, or job recruitment. You are also going to be more willing to spend money on a product that could increase your career earnings, because it becomes easy to rationalize as an investment in yourself. According to Insider Intelligence, who runs an annual survey of 15,000 respondents, LinkedIn ranks highly among social media platforms that Americans trust most. It was in the top spot for 4 years straight, but just got edged out by Pinterest. The company's branding of being a professional place where professionals discuss professional things helps this reputation, even though it still takes advantage of the same human emotions to sell advertising space as every other social media site. That's not actually the problem, though. As a YouTuber, I am sympathetic to the fact that a company in the market for attention needs to monetize that attention to run a sustainable business. LinkedIn attracts a niche, valuable audience with high intent, and they should charge what people are offering to pay for impressions. LinkedIn vets advertisers more rigorously than other platforms like Meta's Ad Manager or Google AdSense. The problem that this actually creates for your career is that it forces you to think that you need to add more achievements to your page in order to stand out. According to the market research database Grandview Research, the American personal development market is worth $12 billion and expected to grow at a rate of 4.1% over the next 8 years. People are spending more of their money and unpaid hours to collect certifications like they are Pokemon gym badges. Recruiters and hiring managers love this trend because they are paid to put people in roles, and the performance of a new hire once they are in the job doesn't matter to them. Convincing the manager that will actually be responsible for the new hire is much easier when they have a long list of certifications to point out. There is no evidence to suggest that career development training has any correlation with job performance, and on the contrary, people that seek out meaningless tokens to boost their employability are more likely to switch jobs more often. LinkedIn didn't create this problem, but it did make it much worse, and unfortunately, that's what you have to compete with now. The 1% of people who actually post on LinkedIn also set the standard for working unpaid overtime, putting a job first, and blurring the lines between professional and personal domains. They do it to show off and increase their chances of getting a job, but since it's the only thing that gets displayed on the world's largest professional network, companies and managers start to think it's a normal expectation. The fourth way that LinkedIn is ruining your career is by creating a culture of corporate worship. Since posts on LinkedIn are not anonymous and people want to keep their jobs, any post that mentions a company is going to be overwhelmingly positive. Some companies strongly suggest that their staff have a strong presence on LinkedIn because they know it can help their image as a desirable employer. Corporate worship is not just weird, it can hurt your career. Big companies make it very easy for people to believe that they are doing something bigger than just exchanging their time and skills for money. Companies have been doing this for a long time before LinkedIn. Walmart employees have to recite their company cheer every morning because it helps with staff retention, but LinkedIn has enabled companies to push this kind of cringe corporate worship into the mainstream. The overwhelmingly positive feedback that LinkedIn gives companies also makes them less likely to acknowledge areas of weakness in their organization. Praise from identified members of a team is much easier for managers to address than criticism from an anonymous forum. Many don't stop to think that they aren't going to get negative feedback from people who just want to advance their careers. And that's the worst part. In most professional industries, not having a LinkedIn profile is seen as strange and unprofessional. For some companies, it can immediately disqualify you as a candidate. Recruitment agencies that specialize in tech and finance have publicly said that people without a LinkedIn account don't take their career seriously enough to be considered for jobs. So even though that everybody that uses the platform knows it's a giant corporate circle jerk, they need to play along to get the most out of their career. One of the most alarming trends to come from LinkedIn recently followed the wave of tech layoffs where ex-employees wrote appreciation posts about the companies that just fired them. The employees didn't do it because they were grateful for the skills and experience they gained from their time with the company. They did it because it was the most corporate-friendly way to announce they were looking for a new job. These posts benefited the company more than the laid-off employees, but if it gave these employees even a slightly better chance of finding a new job quickly, many were willing to put their dignity aside and play along, which is something that they will probably be doing for the rest of their lives. Companies have been trying to cut down on workers for as long as those workers have demanded pay and benefits. Whether it's downsizing, outsourcing, streamlining, understaffing, or automating, if there is something a business can do to get rid of workers and their salaries, you better believe they are going to do it. But this time does feel a little bit different. Recent AI advances have been mocked for not quite living up to the bold claims of their tech bro founders. But even in their current imperfect form, LLMs, general use robots, and generative models are already replacing jobs, and they are getting better every day. So that's bad for workers. But if you're a senior corporate executive or company owner, maybe you should be asking yourself, if we automate everybody's job, who is going to buy all of your shit?
A new study out today predicting almost half of all global jobs could be affected by artificial intelligence.
That 40% of all jobs around the world will be impacted by AI.
And found AI could replace 300 million full-time jobs, including positions in the legal and engineering fields.
So far, there are 9 robots here doing the work of more than 250 humans.
I have some good news and some bad news for your theoretical company. The good news is that labor reduction systems of all varieties have already cut out millions of man-hours in America alone and made the workers who are left more efficient at their jobs. Artificial intelligence is just another tool that your company can use to get more work out of fewer staff or replace teams entirely. Even here at Little Old Works Media Group, we used to have someone working part-time whose job it was to cut out images on Photoshop to use in our goofy little animations. Now, Adobe Suite has inbuilt AI features which can automatically remove backgrounds from any image with absolutely no human time or skill involved. Now, we love our editors, so we gave him more work editing our history videos. But there are a lot of companies that now don't need to or don't want to employ people for these simple jobs. According to a survey of 697 companies conducted by Metrigy, a research and strategic advisory firm, whatever that means, companies who did not use AI in calendar 2023 hired 89% more agents than those who did use AI in their contact centers. For existing employees, it was even worse. When AI was added to a contact center, 36.8% of companies laid off an average of 26.1% of their employees. These alarming numbers were within just 1 year, and just within call centers, which have already been hit by outsourcing, understaffing, and automation harder than most other professional services. For now. So, congratulations. Your business now has reduced headcount and significantly reduced expenses. But here comes the bad news. In 1914, Henry Ford doubled the salary of his factory workers to $5 per day. The story goes he did this because he wanted all of his employees to be able to afford a Ford Model T of their own, boosting company revenue. Now, this is basically complete nonsense. In reality, Ford just wanted to reduce staff turnover and denied talent to up-and-coming car companies like Dodge to maintain his monopoly over the growing automobile industry. But as with every good fairy tale, there is a nugget of truth in there. If the employment rate suddenly drops as hard as it did in the call centers from the study in every company around the world, then companies will undeniably struggle with reduced revenue as people without jobs don't have the buying power they once did, and even people with jobs will cut back out of fear that they might be next. But there is a business plan that you, as a hypothetical titan of industry, might want to consider so that this isn't a problem. And that's just making stuff exclusively for other wealthy business owners while diverting resources away from people who have nothing to offer you that can't be done more efficiently by a machine or a cheaper worker on the other side of the world. Now, if you think that sounds a bit crazy, you should know that it's already kind of happening. And the best place to see it is in video games. Yes, those occasionally fun distractions from real life are the perfect example of this shift happening in the real world right now. So let me cook. According to Grandview Research, the video game industry is now bigger than the movie, music, and television industries combined, and it has honed in its most profitable strategy. Free-to-play games are ironically some of the most profitable games on the market, because they have perfected a business strategy called freemium pricing. Most people will play their games for free, but a select few, affectionately known in the industry as whales, will spend thousands, sometimes even millions of dollars on a single game to unlock in-game perks that would be almost impossible to obtain as a free user. It's important that these games still have free users though, because without them, the whales would have nobody to show off to or pwn with their paid-for advantages. In a world where people are looking for budget-friendly forms of entertainment, the game industry has realized that the best way to turn a profit is to cater to those who have the financial means, or at the very least, the credit limit, to spend ridiculous amounts of money on a video game. The people who have the most financial means don't work for their money. They own income-producing assets. And if automation does replace jobs on an even more widespread scale, that will make your ability to work less valuable and simultaneously income-producing assets more valuable. The rate of change in AI and automation makes the future impossible to predict. But if the people investing in these technologies want to see a financial return on that investment, they are going to learn what the game industry already has. There is more money to be made by catering to other rich people, and everybody else can be kept around as entertainment. Now, if you think that sounds a bit depressing, well, welcome to this channel. But also, I should tell you that market trends already say this is happening. AI isn't going to change your world. It's just going to continue a trend that's already been happening for years now. In the 1992 movie Glengarry Glen Ross, the iconic Always Be closing scene has Alec Baldwin's character bragging to another salesman about driving an $80,000 BMW. Adjusted for $1992, according to the Bureau of Labor Statistics, that would be the equivalent of just under $182,000 today. That is a very expensive automobile, to be sure. But these days, if you drive around a major city, you're likely to see dozens of cars that cost that much or more, and they probably wouldn't even stand out that much. According to company sales data and historic records, Lamborghini has sold more cars in the last 10 years alone than it did in all the rest of the company's history combined, because there is simply a bigger market for $300,000 cars than ever before. The same general trend is true for other extreme luxury brands like Bentley, Ferrari, Patek Philippe, luxury groceries at Erewhon, gym memberships that cost more than rent, hotels that make Hilton look like a Holiday Inn, and to top it off, private jets are all now way more popular than they ever have been. One thing that often gets lost in discussions of wealth inequality is that, yes, billionaires are getting richer, but there are also far more rich people around than ever before, and it's because the value of an hour of human labor has stayed more or less stagnant, while the value of an asset and the availability of credit has skyrocketed. People who held onto an even modest portfolio over the last 4 years now have enormous fortunes. Certain individuals got incredibly lucky with good investments, and other people accessed easy credit to get absolutely jacked to the tits on leverage and ride the longest asset bull run in history. Very few people have made modern fortunes through work alone. And you might have even noticed how investing went from something that you should do to secure your retirement to something you need to do to have any quality of life at all. If robots really do take over, then it will just continue to push the value of an hour of human work down, because it could be done by a machine instead. And it will rally the value of assets because business owners and investors will benefit from the free labor substitute. This is where people point to policy fixes like a universal basic income. If you haven't heard about this idea by now, that's impressive. But it's basically a government payment made to everybody, regardless of personal financial conditions, that should be enough to cover basic living expenses. It's been proposed as a solution to keep the whole system going if people can't earn an income for themselves because their labor has been outsourced or automated. But that is still not a desirable outcome for anybody. If comprehensive automation of human labor gets as far as needing this, then you will fall into one of two defined classes of people. You will either be getting by based on a government lifeline, or you will be in the class of people that own the businesses complaining about all the taxes they need to pay to fund that lifeline. I find it a little bit easier to sympathize with one of those groups. But there are still no winners. Just last week, the results of one of the most comprehensive universal basic income experiments was published. The research gave 1,000 people living in Texas and Illinois $1,000 a month with no conditions attached. To qualify for this study, their 2019 household income had to be less than 300% of the federal poverty line, or $37,470 for an individual. There was also an unlucky control group of 2,000 people who were only given $50 a month. This is because when your personal finances are being studied, you are more likely to be careful about your spending decisions, and the researchers wanted to control for these changes. The study itself was funded by an organization called Open Research, which is not technically affiliated with OpenAI, but they are both managed by Sam Altman, who has been very vocal about how this technology could displace billions of jobs. Now, if you ever find yourself running an AI startup that burns millions of dollars a day, then one of the best ways to ensure that you keep that investor money coming is to pretend to be really scared about how your technology is going to replace workers, because, well, replacing workers is really exciting to investors. So realistically, this study was probably little more than a marketing stunt conducted by one of the best funded organizations in the space. But that doesn't mean that the results aren't still interesting. The key results related to employment was that the group that received the $1,000 payment ended up earning significantly less for themselves than the control group. After the payment was accounted for, they still earned more. But $12,000 alone is not enough to live anywhere in America without other forms of support. All households ended up earning more, but that was largely because this experiment started right at the beginning of COVID, when employment, particularly in low-wage professions, was hurt by lockdowns. The reason the researchers gave as to why households receiving the subsidy ended up earning less money for themselves was because many people took it as an opportunity to cut down on how much they were working and commit more time to leisure and looking after their family. This fits the optimistic idea of an AI future where we can have machines do everything for us while we just relax and collect universal basic income. But the findings still told a story of people who were financially struggling. Mental health improved because people were less stressed, but those improvements faded by the end of the first year. Food security also increased, but again only in the first year, as even people with additional income fell victim to rising living expenses, and that was when they could work to earn additional money. When compared to being plunged into poverty, it's an okay compromise. But this isn't going to happen overnight. Outsourcing turned entire cities in America into ghost towns, but it happened so slowly that big changes like this never got addressed. The endgame for people investing into automation is to build that automated utopian future. The endgame for everyone else is to make sure that they aren't excluded from it. Corporate America has just lost one of the most powerful tools to keep people from getting better jobs. Non-compete agreements that ban workers from finding a better job have been used to keep wages low. And even if you have never personally signed one of these agreements, they will almost certainly still be hurting you. Late last month, the FTC banned these deals from being put into contracts for most employees, and most existing non-competes will be phased out over the next 3 months. Unless you run a business that relies on keeping employees in bad conditions for poor pay, this ruling will be good for you. But that doesn't mean that corporate America is going down without a fight.
Welcome back. The Federal Trade Commission has just voted to ban almost all non-compete agreements between companies and their employees. That new ban also applies to any existing non-compete agreements.
Hey, Tony, good morning. The Federal Trade Commission wants to make it easier for you to get a new job.
Final rule that would, in effect, ban most businesses from using non-compete clauses in hiring.
A non-compete clause is a condition in a contract which bans an employee from working for another company for some amount of time after they quit or get fired from their current position. Companies claim that these terms were very important because they didn't want to spend their time and money training staff and giving them proprietary information just for them to get a job with their competitor and take all that valuable information over to them. To play devil's advocate, for some employees, this kind of makes sense. High-level company executives, R&D staff, and even sales staff might have company information that would be valuable to a competitor and detrimental to their business if they got out. If the CFO at a company got a job at a competitor and they knew that their old company was having cash flow problems, their new company could use that information to run them out of business. Sales staff could also call up all of their client list and bring them over to a new company since they know the exact details of deals they were getting with their old company. Spoiler alert for a 20-year-old show, but Michael Scott wouldn't have been able to start Michael Scott Paper Company, which nearly put his old employer out of business, if he had signed a non-compete agreement. Scott knew his old clients and how much they were paying for their paper, so he was able to undercut his old company by calling them up and giving them a better deal. This was good for the customers, and good for healthy competition. But it wasn't good for the large incumbent Dunder Mifflin, who got outcompeted by a smaller, more efficient operation. Businesses have argued that they can't operate if they have no legal means to protect their valuable information. They have also said that without non-compete agreements, their competitors could free ride off them by just poaching their staff after they have made the investment into hiring and training inexperienced workers. The Federal Trade Commission and its controversial new chair, Lena Khan, have basically called this out as complete bullshit. In their announcement of a stop of non-compete agreements being put into employment contracts, the FTC also said that even if this does hurt some big businesses, that's actually a good thing. The free rider argument really doesn't work because those businesses could also attract their own talent from their competitors too. All they need to do is give their employees a more attractive job offer, and most people are happy to switch jobs. If people do take company information with them, the FTC argues that the only group this is bad for is a company that doesn't want to compete. Companies also don't need non-competes to protect themselves from people taking their intellectual property. Patent, trademark, and industry secret laws already exist, and non-disclosure agreements where previous employees can't legally disclose information about their previous employers are still totally enforceable. Dunder Mifflin was a work of fiction, but many real companies are forced to offer better services at better prices and pay their employees more competitive salaries, because an ex-employee of theirs learned about their industry and started a better firm with the experience they gained working for their old employer. Most successful companies are started by people who were previously employees working for a company in the same industry. Gary Tan, the CEO of Y Combinator, an early-stage startup incubator, has said that the best companies he deals with are ones started by people who first gained experience in the industry they want to disrupt by working in it. The Federal Trade Commission estimated in the report that this new rule will lead to the formation of at least 8,500 extra businesses every year and between 17,000 and 29,000 new patents every year. According to the organization's research, these are all being blocked because people aren't legally allowed to innovate or start a business. The only people that lose in this situation are the companies that don't want to compete, which is why it's the FTC, not the Department of Labor, that made this ruling. The FTC is normally the organization in charge of making sure that businesses aren't forming monopolies. It does this by blocking mergers or acquisitions that would give the new mega corporations too much power. In the last 3 years, the FTC has been trying their best to stop some large company mergers, but they have so far lost all of their recent cases in court, allowing the mergers to go ahead. The FTC can also break up companies that have too much market power, but it hasn't done that in over 40 years. So what the FTC really does most of the time is make rulings like non-compete agreements being a form of anti-competitive practice, which is illegal. You wouldn't think that this would be a hard case for them to make, since the words non-compete are right there in the name. But the FTC is already being sued over this ruling by an industry body representing companies. But let's be honest with one another. Even though the companies and the FTC won't admit it, non-compete agreements were never about competition between one company and another. It was about competition between a company and its employees. The real reason that non-compete agreements have become such a big issue in America is because they are not being used as they were originally intended. Stifling innovation and making it illegal for talented people to start competing companies was already pretty bad, but companies just started using these contracts to trap their employees in bad jobs. According to research done by S&P Market Intelligence on 67,000 workers, 1 in 6 service workers in the fast food industry had a non-compete agreement as part of their contract. Fast food workers have no valuable company information, and they don't pose a threat to revenue. Nobody is going to stop eating at Five Guys and go to Chick-fil-A just because Freddy the Fry Guy changed jobs. What it does, though, is make it very hard for minimum wage workers to find another job that they have experience for. So even if they could earn more, or if they are being asked to work unfair conditions, they can't quit because they are not allowed to work anywhere else. Giving fast food managers that much power over minimum wage staff has not only cut down on wage growth for the people that need it the most, according to the FTC, it's also created unsafe working conditions, enabled wage theft, and made career advancement slower because nobody dares to complain. Workers making lower incomes were also found to be the ones least likely to argue against the inclusion of non-compete agreements in their contracts because they were afraid that they would lose a job offer they desperately needed at the time. It might sound bad locking people with the least negotiating power into bad jobs they can't escape from, but non-competes have actually been used to control a group that gets even worse than this. A report by Johns Hopkins University found that 45% of vital healthcare workers, doctors, nurses, and support staff are employed under a non-compete agreement. Doctors are required by law to share any information pertaining to their patient's health with other licensed providers, provided the patient provides consent, and training is based on industry standards. So the only reason that hospitals are doing this is to lock in the staff they have at a time where there is a desperate shortage of medical workers in the country. Doctors practicing in a hospital are highly likely to start their own practice as part of their natural career progression. A non-compete can potentially stop that, making clients go through the hospital to deal with the doctor of their choice. That's not only bad for doctors and nurses who could find better jobs or start their own business, it's bad for you. The FTC estimates that providing more competition in the medical industry and encouraging more businesses with less overhead to enter the market, medical costs can be reduced by as much as $194 billion over the next decade. Now, even if you aren't under a non-compete agreement, these deals are pushing down market rates for most jobs, especially those in industries with a lot of worker competition. The FTC estimates that typical workers will earn an additional $524 a year after this change, whether or not they had a non-compete in place. It should also make finding a job easier because companies won't be able to hold their employees captive in their positions, which means they will need to hire more often. That's really what companies are angry about, even if they won't say it out loud. But don't get too excited yet, because these companies still have a few loopholes to fight back with. Most non-compete agreements would be extremely hard to enforce already, but for a minimum wage employee between jobs, the threat of expensive legal action with big fancy sounding contracts was enough to keep them in line. Companies will easily be able to find other conditions that achieve the same thing. Already, 95% of employees who have a non-compete agreement in their contract also have a non-disclosure agreement in their contract, which employers could use to make the same kinds of threats. The FTC warned employers that make non-disclosure agreements so broad that it would prevent their employees from getting another job that it will be counted as the same kind of non-competitive practice. But that still requires a regular employee to file a legal complaint against their employer, which, let's be honest, not many people are going to do. Companies could also do something even more sinister and make contracts with each other in so-called non-poach agreements that cut out the need for any formal agreement with employees at all. According to the legal firm Schneider Wallace, a no-poaching agreement is when 2 or more companies come to an agreement to limit hiring of each other's employees. The agreement is to not poach employees of the other firm in exchange for the same not happening to their employees. These agreements are usually deemed anti-competitive and illegal, but they are incredibly hard to find, especially in industries like fast food, where handshake deals can be made between local franchise owners. Even if these practices are investigated, the fines to settle the case are usually less than the cost of paying employees competitive local rates, so it can be written off as the cost of doing business. Companies can also maintain any non-compete agreements they have with senior executive level staff. just to make sure that every company in America didn't conveniently promote all of their staff to the level of senior executive cashier, the rule only applies to staff that earn over $150,000 in the previous year and who are in genuine policy-making positions. Employers can't add new non-compete agreements to these employees, but they are allowed to keep the existing ones in place, which means if the ruling is enforced, eventually someone is going to be the last person in America working under a non-compete agreement. But that's if all of this actually happens. The FTC can make rulings about what it's going to enforce, but it's still up to the courts to decide what is legal or not according to the law. The FTC has unsurprisingly already been sued by the US Chamber of Commerce and a few other businesses around the country that are arguing that this ruling is not legal according to any existing federal law. The FTC has been on a bit of a losing streak with its big legal battles, so while this ruling is definitely worth celebrating, businesses still have a hope of getting their way. 4 years ago, America and the rest of the world saw its most intense spike in unemployment in recorded history. In today's news cycle, that is ancient history. But what isn't ignored is what has been left behind. There are now over 10 million people, mostly men in America, who are not working, not studying, not retired, and not institutionalized. They are just doing nothing. COVID accelerated this trend, but it's been going on for decades. Since the 1960s, about 0.1% of American men have given up on work to never come back every single month. So why are so many people giving up so consistently? And more importantly, how are these people surviving without a job in this economy?
In October, Mississippi's labor force participation rate was nearly 54%, while the national rate was over 62%.
How many jobs on these two websites?
It's been over 1,000 combined.
They're not working and they're not looking for a job, and those are the folks who we have to get into the labor market.
Why aren't some Americans getting back to work? It's the million-dollar question.
There are a lot of reasons why someone might not participate in the labor force. They might have retired, they might be still studying for qualifications, there might be people who are too sick to work, stay-at-home spouses, members of the military who are clearly working but don't officially count as part of the labor force, and then of course, there are just really rich people who don't need to work to maintain their lifestyle. These groups have always existed, but there is a new group growing alongside them, which are people who have just given up. The fastest growing group of these labor force dropouts have been men between the ages of 25 and 55. Men in this age range would typically be in the prime of their careers, but more and more of them are not working at all. Now, some of this can simply be explained by the fact that more women have entered the workforce. In fact, up until 2008, women were entering the workforce almost as quickly as men were leaving it. Some men just took on domestic roles as stay-at-home husbands while their wives or partners focus on their careers instead. According to Pew Research, young women are now earning significantly more than young men in most major cities in America. Young women are also graduating college at higher rates than men. So it makes sense that a growing group of men are tossing aside typical gender roles and doing work that doesn't get counted as typical employment. If this were the whole story, there would be absolutely nothing wrong with this. But let's be honest. Having a stay-at-home parent, no matter what gender they are, is a luxury that most people simply cannot afford in the modern age, especially young people who are the fastest growing group of labor force dropouts. There is something more going on here. Nicholas Eberstadt is a political economist who published the book Men Without Work, which tracked the trend of working-age men simply giving up on work and largely removing themselves from society in the process. His book, which was first published in 2016, lines up perfectly with a 2022 study on the issue conducted by the Federal Reserve Bank of Boston, which found that men without a college degree in particular were dropping out of work because their earnings power was significantly lower than their peers who did have a 4-year degree. That's not unusual, because college-educated people should expect to earn more than non-college-educated workers on average. But the finding found that the gap between the two groups had widened significantly, especially amongst college-educated versus non-college-educated men. Now, this was particularly surprising to the researchers because it would actually make more sense that higher income workers would drop out of the labor force, because if they are earning a lot of money, they have a better chance of marrying a higher earning spouse or just saving up more money for an early retirement. Instead, they found the opposite. The group that earned less were more likely to drop out of work. And yes, before you ask, the study did account for the fact that people not working won't be making an income, so they would automatically be in the non-working low-income group. Now, since men are now overrepresented in non-college graduates, they were the largest group of people giving up on work. But even though it's tempting to make this an entirely gender-specific issue, and to be honest, it would make for a more engaging YouTube video, there are some bigger forces at play here. The reason that people with lower incomes were dropping out was simply because they had less to lose and more to gain. Most unskilled jobs cannot buy you a comfortable lifestyle basically anywhere in America anymore. And as more people tie their identity and social status to their work and income, it's become much harder to accept unglamorous service positions. If you were given two options, honestly consider which one you would choose. You could scrape by working a few minimum wage jobs where you are on your feet dealing with customers and managers all day. A job where you are unlikely to advance too far without a degree, and you won't have much time or energy left at the end of the day to pursue side projects. You might also be working a job that you aren't exactly proud to share with your friends, family, or romantic interests. The other option is that you could scrape by on whatever government programs or family support you could find. Maybe work on some side projects in your spare time, or just fill your day with low-cost recreation like playing video games. I would like to think I appreciate the value of a hard day's work, but I have always had the luxury of a prestigious career and successful business. Given these specific options, how would you choose to spend your day? If you are brave enough, go ahead and share it in the comments below, so people on the internet can call you a bootlicker or a lazy zoomer respectively. Now, the second option also has the advantage that if someone asks you what you do for work, you can just tell them that you are working on a new business or taking some time off. The Fed study found that this was one of the biggest reasons people didn't want to take on jobs that they thought were beneath them. Now, no matter what side of the fence you are on, this issue affects us all. These millions of people are out of work at the same time as we have major issues with worker shortages in our most important industries. And this trend is only going to get worse unless something changes. So it's time to learn how money works to find out how these people are surviving without work and what it means for the rest of the workforce if they never come back. Apart from a few early retirees that made a lot of money at a young age, most of the people who are not working and are not looking for work are living extremely basic lives. Eberstadt's research went beyond the broader demographic studies and focused a lot on trying to figure out what these people were actually doing with their time. Now, the next few minutes are going to contain some hard-to-swallow pills, and even though Eberstadt is sometimes a bit direct with the way he lays out the facts, his research and his recommendations address some of the most important issues in our society. He found through national surveys that the average man not in work or looking for work was basically doing what you might expect. They were sitting at home, spending a majority of time behind a screen. Most of them contribute very little to looking after other members of a household, and they were underrepresented in other civic activities like volunteering, even though they had more free time than their peers who worked or studied. He also poked holes in the idea that a lot of these men had just become stay-at-home spouses taking care of chores to support their working partner, a role that was, in the past, typically performed by women. Unfortunately, according to the federal survey data he collated, the average labor force dropout spent an equal amount of time on household care as the average employed woman, and 5 minutes less per day than the average unemployed man, who would theoretically be spending at least some of their time looking for a new job. What they were spending their time on was leisure activities and sleeping. The average person who had dropped out of the labor force was also far less likely to have children or a partner, and Eberstadt theorized that there were two reasons for this. The first reason was that children, dating, and a family life are expensive commitments that people trying to get by without a job just simply wouldn't be able to afford. The second reason was that people with a family to support were inherently more motivated to go out and provide, even if it meant working a job that a single person wouldn't. Of course, this is a large sample size, and there are plenty of people with children who don't work and plenty of couples totally outside of the labor force as well. But even without these typical responsibilities, daily life is still very expensive. Government benefits for people out of work typically only extend to those people who are either actively seeking work or cannot work because of an illness or disability. The exact makeup of these assistance programs varies state to state. And of course, outside of America, different countries have different levels of social welfare. But America is where this trend has been most pronounced, and it's also where a bulk of the research on this trend has been done. So as anybody who has ever tried to apply for government welfare in America will tell you, the burden of proof to qualify for these payments can be exceptionally high, with the only real exception being COVID-era stimulus, where arguably the burden of proof for payments was too low. Saying you need unemployment payments because you would prefer to stay at home all day vaping and playing Fortnite isn't going to fly with Uncle Sam. What Eberstadt did find, though, was that it had become much easier for people to qualify for disability payments, which in most circumstances do not require recipients to be actively looking for work to maintain their payments. In his own book, he highlights how difficult it was to find consistent data on all of the government programs that might be available to these people. And of course, needlessly pointing the finger at assistance to some of society's most vulnerable people is not the point here. What is, though, is that according to data from the Department of Social Security, annual disability insurance payments have outpaced all other major programs. They provide the data as a table, but here is a nice visual line chart. Dr. Dwight R. Lee, an economist, also proposed that a major element that Eberstadt overlooked was that a lot of these men were working. They were just doing it in the underground economy, which was estimated to be contributing about $2 trillion, or about 12% of US GDP. This could include these people doing anything from working informal cash jobs to skirt tax and minimum wage laws to outright illegal operations like shoplifting or selling drugs. So the work of these researchers paints an image of this growing group of individuals mooching off friends, family, and the government, while wasting their days away playing video games or being an overall burden on society. It's not exactly flattering, but to be fair, there are certainly people living these lives, and with nationwide or even global demographic trends like this, broad strokes need to be made. The researchers studying this trend are actually highly sympathetic to the situation of these people, and they seem motivated to actually fix the cause of these problems. I will of course be leaving a link to the full book in the video description if you want to read it yourself, as well as some great interviews these men have done that lets them articulate their grim feelings in a way that's a bit more human. The reality is that I can personally see if just a few things went differently in my own life, I could have easily fallen into the same comfortable trap. Most of you watching could have too, whether you realize it or not. But this still doesn't answer the most important question. Why is this becoming more common? Most people, if given the choice, would prefer a nice stable job with an income that could provide a standard of living beyond basic survival. But yet, more and more people are dropping out of even trying to look for a job every single year. There is unfortunately no single answer as to why people are giving up, but there are some contributing factors. Firstly, competition for good prestigious jobs have become far more fierce, while pay for basic jobs has not kept up with living costs. UPS drivers are grabbing headlines across the country for being awarded salaries of $170,000 a year for doing deliveries. It sounds amazing, but if this is even true, it's a good news story that is covering up a trend that has cost you dearly. There is a reason these delivery drivers are making six figures and you aren't.
Then it all began to shift. There's no correlation now between productivity and wages. Folks in the middle class are in trouble.
Record-breaking jobs growth, wages aren't growing as fast as expected, and many economists aren't sure we're going to see much of a pickup from here.
Last month, the union representing 340,000 UPS employees, including drivers, threatened a major strike unless the company renegotiated contracts around pay, benefits, and conditions. The company came to a compromise over all of these points. The union wanted air conditioning in all vehicles, and the company compromised by offering air conditioning in all new vehicles.
That cargo area where all the packages are kept, it's pretty much like opening up a big oven and walking into it.
The union also wanted clear language about drones and driverless vehicles that could take workers' jobs. The company can still use new technologies, but now it needs to inform workers and the union before it does. And most importantly, the union wanted a significant pay raise for workers, which the company did agree to, but it will come into effect over the next 5 years.
Teamsters want a very strong contract, and we want a very strong contract for ourselves, and of course, we want it for the future.
According to data from the U.S. Census Bureau, wages for average Americans have been stagnant since the 1970s, and according to a Bankrate survey of 2,500 Americans, people need a salary of $233,000 a year to feel financially comfortable. That's more than 3 times the median household income, which is $71,000 a year. But it is in line with the amount that the average household would be earning if wages kept up with productivity. If that did happen, the $170,000 that UPS drivers negotiated would make them below average earners like you would expect unskilled drivers to be. But instead, their incredible earning power is making headlines. There are 3 reasons why UPS drivers are making this much money, and 3 reasons why you are not. The first reason is that the earnings of UPS drivers have been exaggerated, but not in the way that you would expect.
What do you mean by that?
The media being the media has taken the number at face value.
$170,000 a year. Will soon earn an average of $170,000 a year.
Top-rate drivers for UPS will now be earning $44.26 per hour. At 40 hours a week, 52 weeks in a year, that is an annual pay of $92,000, a good income, but $78,000 less than what is being reported. Base pay is going to continue to increase over 5 years to $49 an hour, which would make annual pay $102,000 a year. Another $23,000 has been negotiated for full-time drivers as a contribution towards the company's pension plan. The company also provides good medical insurance to workers and their families. The fourth component is rates for overtime, which will now be more than $60 an hour. By adding everything up, the company and the union have estimated that the average driver would need a $170,000 a year job to replace their delivery job. That might be a distinction without a difference, but there is a reason you have been hearing so much about it. The union wants to broadcast this success because it is a great result for their members, and it can attract more people into the industry to join the union to negotiate for the same deal.
UPS workers should be paid more and have more benefits. I don't know. Then we're going on strike. Wait, let's talk it out. For starters, all UPS union employees should receive a $275 hour raise this year. Okay, really? Okay, sign here.
UPS, the company, is also doing a lot of press around these negotiations because they know it is great publicity for their company when it's getting harder to attract new workers in difficult blue-collar jobs like trucking. Most of the stories don't mention that most UPS delivery drivers are not full-time and won't receive the same benefits. The strong earning potential of full-time drivers is the best tool the company has to keep its part-time workforce happy with limited hours, limited benefits, and limited pay because they are holding out for the hopes that one day they can become a full-time driver and make the money they kept hearing about. Even drivers that do make it to full-time are going to work extremely hard for their money. To make the $170,000 package that is getting so much press, a full-time UPS driver needs to work an average of 15 hours of overtime every week. Delivery drivers and truckers already work unusual hours, so reports of these roles putting significant strain on family life and a healthy lifestyle are common.
We have some lower seniority drivers that haven't known what it's like to work less than a 12-hour day for years.
Now, maybe you already work overtime in a stressful job, and the only difference is that you are not getting paid any overtime for it. Professional white-collar jobs rarely have formal overtime, so if you work in one of these roles, the only compensation you are going to get for putting in extra hours is keeping your job or maybe a promotion if you are lucky. And there are two reasons for this. The first reason is that white-collar work is typically less operational. The company you work for doesn't make any additional revenue for every TPS report you file, but UPS does for every additional package delivered. The second reason is that if you work a professional office job, you typically could earn more money over your career by being awarded high-level management positions. The overtime you do as a junior is paid for with professional development. It's bullshit, but most white-collar workers consider themselves better than clocking in and clocking out for overtime, so they don't fight as hard to be compensated for the hours they work. Under the Fair Labor Standards Act, high-level management and executive employees are not entitled to overtime compensation. To take advantage of this, a lot of companies give junior-level white-collar employees phony titles like sales executive. The employee gets a small ego boost, and the company doesn't have to pay overtime. The second reason that full-time UPS drivers are making more than you is because they have a lot of negotiating power because they are hard to replace. Total compensation is a function of how well you or a collective body like a union can negotiate, how much money you can make the company, and how hard it is to replace you.
What are the remaining sticking points in this negotiation?
Completely economics. We've got 95% of the contract negotiated, all favorable for our members, no concessions, and UPS just is balking at rewarding the people that make them the success that they are.
If you aren't making as much as a UPS driver, it's simply because you aren't maximizing one or more of these three variables. UPS has strong earnings per employee, with the average worker in the business contributing $191,000 per year in top-line revenue across the 220 countries and territories it operates in. The company does not release financials specifically for the American market, but it's likely that earnings are higher for workers in America because it is a large market with a strong appetite for e-commerce, which is fulfilled by companies like UPS. A company can't pay its employees more than it makes in top-line revenue because it also has to cover overheads and return a profit to shareholders. UPS's earnings per worker are lower than most large companies because it employs so many people. Walmart, another large employer, had revenues per employee of $260,000 in 2022, but it had more overhead with thousands of large locations, inventory, and higher marketing expenditure. People do more thorough analysis on the fundamentals of a company they want to invest a few $1,000s into than they do on a company they want to build a career with. Negotiating is also something you probably suck at. A survey by the talent management company Robert Half found that only 54% of professionals negotiated a higher salary with their most recent employment offer. 66% of men surveyed asked for more money, and only 46% of women did. A more recent study by Pew Research on white-collar and blue-collar workers found that only 30% of those surveyed negotiated their pay when accepting their current job. At the same time, 9 out of 10 employees are open to negotiating salaries, and 85% of employees who asked for a raise were successful in negotiating one. If you don't seek out more competitive offers from your current job or move jobs to get a better package, a company is unlikely to offer you anything competitive. New hires are out-earning seasoned employees in most companies in America right now because companies aren't going to keep your wages competitive unless you make them. UPS drivers had the benefit of negotiating these wages collectively through one of the most powerful unions in America. But if you are hard to replace, you could have just as much negotiating power. And that's the third thing most people don't get right. They don't make themselves hard to replace. Driving for UPS sounds like a straightforward job, but drivers are expected to keep strict schedules and practice the 340 methods of the business. These methods tell drivers the most efficient way to do just about everything, such as buckling their seatbelts with their left hand while turning the ignition with their right hand to save precious seconds after doing a delivery. A neurotic attention to detail increases deliveries per hour and reduces accidents and damage to cargo. A driver fully trained on these methods will deliver twice as many packages and have half as many cost-incurring incidents as an untrained driver. But it takes a lot of time and money for drivers to become familiar with this long list of best practices. It might not look like high-skilled work, but a fully trained driver will generate more revenue and will be harder to replace than you will be if you are hoping to get a job as a graduate professional. Colleges across the country make millions of new graduates every year, but a skilled UPS driver has to be made in-house, and their knowledge of the company's operating methods is worth more than most business degrees. The third reason why UPS drivers are earning six figures and you aren't is because we can't replace them. E-commerce has cut retail jobs and created delivery jobs in parallel. A lot of other jobs since the 1970s have been offshored or automated. Delivery drivers haven't been affected by either, yet. Automated delivery drones and driverless trucks were a focus of union negotiations, but the most cost-effective way to get packages delivered over the crucial last mile is still a person in a van.
My concern is that AI won't be able to account for the things that a human can. I've got years of experience. I know to look down the road a mile to see potential hazards. 80,000 pounds driving headlong unmanned.
A new driver hoping to make logistics a long-term career is taking a serious risk that driverless technology doesn't make them redundant, and to compensate for that risk, companies such as UPS need to match that risk with the potential for a high reward. So you probably shouldn't don the brown socks, but you should make sure that you understand the opportunities and the risks of your own career plan before committing too much time and effort towards it. The bonus fourth reason that UPS drivers earn more than you is because it's not a glamorous job. People are willing to take a serious financial hit just to get a job title with prestige. A 2018 survey found that 39% of employers give promotions without a pay raise, up from 22% in 2011. Younger employees seem more likely to accept these deals. 72% of people under 34 said they would be willing to take a new title without an improved salary as long as it sounded more senior. In its 9 seasons on air, the office of Dunder Mifflin was run by 11 different regional managers.
Everybody, David Wallace and I have talked, and we have decided to promote Jim to the position of co-manager.
Some had their jobs for years, others for less than an hour. But the office never ran better in the rare times when there was no manager at all.
Unleash the power of the pyramid.
I get that this is just a comedy, but sometimes what makes this show so funny is how close to reality it gets at times. If a company is set up properly, people really can just come into work, do their job, and go home without layers of authority on top of them micromanaging their every move, getting in the way of actual business operations, and taking home the biggest salaries in the office. Bad management can ruin even the best ideas and end up costing their companies lots of money in the process.
It's true.
About $3 trillion a year according to recent studies, which is why some companies are starting to rethink if the hierarchical business structure is a thing of the past. A typical business management is responsible for choosing the direction of the company.
I declare bankruptcy!
Training their subordinates and providing them with the tools they need to move the company in that direction, rewarding employees if they excel in their work, and punishing employees that don't meet their standards. These 5 tasks encompass everything that a manager is responsible for, and they are all very important roles in running a successful business, so it's not like the role of a manager is redundant by default. But some companies are starting to realize that these 5 tasks can be done without a manager at all, often with better results. This isn't some socialist propaganda either. These are regular businesses trying to operate in the best way to maximize profits for their shareholders. Some of the organizations we will look at in this video are owned by billionaires who would not benefit at all from the rich being eaten. To get rid of hierarchical management structures that have been used by organizations for centuries, a company would need to see that a managerless organization is possible and advantageous for shareholders. You not liking your boss is unfortunately not a good enough reason to change how a company operates, and a few of the managerless companies we will look at later are famous for being pretty terrible places to work anyway, so worker satisfaction is not going on the list. Apart from that, there are 4 big advantages to getting rid of managers that shareholders will actually care about. Number 1, it saves money. Businesses should always be trying to cut down on unnecessary expenses, and managers are typically paid more than the workers they are managing. If they can be removed, then that leaves more money to be paid back to the shareholders. This is the obvious one, but less companies think to do this than you might imagine. A 2016 report by the Harvard Business Review found that excess management was costing the states $3 trillion per year. That's like removing the state of California and Texas and making them micromanage each other. But why would profit-driven companies do this? Well, managers are normally the first people consulted about incoming layoffs, and they are also the people tasked with deciding who leaves and who stays. They are obviously not going to pick themselves, even if they are the person in their team that contributes the least. As you go higher up the corporate ladder, it becomes worse because managers start to look out for people directly below them. The anthropologist David Graeber spoke about this in his book Bullshit Jobs, where he singled out people that only exist in organizations to make their superiors feel important.
So how on earth do you have a situation where private firms are making up jobs where they pay people not to do anything? Now that's exactly the last thing you'd think that a competitive firm would do.
Graeber specifically spoke about receptionists, administrative assistants, and doormen, but middle managers can become flunkies of their own. A senior manager delegates to middle managers, who delegate to team leaders, who delegate to staff. If this chain of command doesn't exist, then the senior managers will just be regular managers, and that simply can't be allowed to happen. One of the first things that most private equity companies do after they take over a business is strip out a lot of management, and it's rare to say that this has any downside effects on the company. Number 2, it removes single points of failure. Managers will either knowingly or unknowingly make themselves needless keyholders in a business. If you work in an office, think of how many tasks you have done a million times before, but still need a manager's sign-off every time. Technology has only made this worse, as now operations on company systems are tied to managers' logged-in details. Sometimes staff shouldn't be allowed to do certain things, and we are not talking about making the company payroll account open to all employees, but that doesn't involve management anyway. I used to work at an investment bank, and I am not allowed to say too much about what I did there. But a big part of my job was making SIPs, or confidential information presentations, which are fancy documents to send to potential buyers, which are packed full of information they need to know about a company they are considering buying. I made countless SIPs in my career, but every time I needed to print, I needed my MD to sign off on it, even if it was a draft. Even if it would never be looked at by anybody external from the business. I am sure you have all had very similar experiences before. If managers are ever asked about what they do around the office, a common responsibility they are unironically proud of is signing off on things. Hierarchical management also creates single points of failure if someone is incompetent or corrupt.
The corporate hierarchy is just an extension of the human need for status and authority.
Advantage number 3, it helps workers stay on task. This one might sound a bit counterintuitive, but let me explain. The job of a good manager is pretty easy, and unless they themselves or their manager gives them lots of meaningless tasks to do, it's very hard to fill up a 40-hour work week with tasks that could be classified as managing. The average manager is responsible for 4.7 subordinates. If a manager was directly managing all equally, that would mean more than 8 hours per week per worker, which is time taken away from their tasks. So either these managers are wasting their subordinates' time, or they are finding ways to fill their own to make themselves look busy. Some managers mix up their time by actually engaging in the same work as their team. This can be an effective form of leadership, but sometimes it can just cause problems if the manager is just a manager and doesn't have the skills needed to do the job they oversee. Graeber talks about the taskmaster. Taskmasters come in 2 distinct varieties: the ones who tell their underlings what to do, and the ones who actively invent pointless tasks just to make sure they can say they have contributed something. The first variety is only pointless if employees in a company would not stay on task without active supervision. In the age of quiet quitting, that may make you think that these managers are essential, but there are other ways to keep people on task that doesn't involve paying people to stand over others with a stopwatch. The second variety, the ones that make up pointless tasks, can be very damaging to a company. How much time do you waste at your job going through appraisals, reviews, assessments, and meetings that could have been in an email, also that your manager has something to put in their calendar? That's time that you are not spending making shareholders money. Advantage number 4, it reduces staff turnover. According to a recent study conducted by Dr. Brian Robinson, the top reason for people leaving their job was poor pay, with 59% of respondents citing this as the reason they resigned. But just behind that, 56% said that poor management was what made them quit. People rarely quit jobs. They quit managers, which is not surprising when you find out that most managers do not receive any formal management training, and most only got their jobs because they were good at non-management roles they had before. Being good at sales, programming, or any other operational job is an entirely different skill set from being a good manager. Sometimes companies get lucky, but not always. The Dilbert principle is the trend for people who are good at their jobs to be promoted until they get to a job that they are no longer good at. I know I have used this example before, but Michael Scott is the best portrayal of this principle ever put to screen. He demonstrated that he was a fantastic salesman that made a lot of money for his company, so he became the logical choice to run the branch when his boss Ed Truck retired. He was not suited to management and ended up causing all the management problems on our list. He would waste people's time, he would cause great damage to the business, and he would do all this while taking home the largest paycheck in the office.
Welcome, 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 welcome. You are all jerks.
Because he was so terrible at his job, he was never going to be promoted again. But the company also believed he had earned his job, so he also continued to barely avoid getting fired. So his poor employees were stuck with him. And this exact situation is far from a work fiction in offices all around the world.
You are the reason I drink. You are the reason I live to forget.
The only reason Michael did not cause more staff turnover was because this was a TV show that needed a consistent cast. In the real world, if people get stuck with a terrible manager who is never going to leave their position, then they quit their job because it's the only escape. Hierarchical management structures also cause staff turnover for a different reason too. Ambitious workers who want to climb the corporate ladder will quickly learn that switching jobs is the fastest way to get a promotion. This is a great strategy for the worker, but it's terrible for the companies because they need to invest money into hiring and training an employee only for them to deliver 2 years worth of service and move on. If a company had no defined hierarchy of management, then workers wouldn't feel as if their career had stagnated because they were passed over for a promotion. Promotions themselves wouldn't exist, so there wouldn't be that motivation to move on. But don't take my word for it. Let's look at some real-world examples of businesses that have made a managerless structure work. You probably think I'm about to start talking about worker co-ops now, and they are a great example. Worker co-ops employ around 20% of the entire world's workforce and are often incredibly successful operations for their owners, who are also the employees. These are often businesses in cottage industries which have a reputation for being a bit alternative, selling organic, tofu-coated, solar power, throw rugs out of their community centers. But these are not the businesses I want to talk about. Instead, I want to start with Renaissance Technologies, which is a hedge fund. Precisely the last business you would expect to do away with rigid management structures.
This is probably the single most successful hedge fund in the history of the industry in terms of its performance record.
Renaissance, and particularly the Medallion Fund, is the most successful hedge fund in history. It delivered an annualized return of 39% after fees between 1988 and 2018. That is 4 times the market return, which is already very good. Just $1,000 invested into this fund at the beginning of that period would be worth $100 million today. The Medallion Fund achieved these returns by employing the world's smartest statisticians, mathematicians, and computer scientists to build computer models to predict the stock market before computer modeling was even possible. Nobody outside the firm knows quite what they get up to these days, and that's exactly how they like it. Renaissance cut off outside investors from their Medallion Fund in the early 90s, and now the business only invests the money of the people that work at the company. The people they hire also get access to all the company's price data and computer models, so they need to make sure that the people stay around, or else their market-beating formulas would eventually leak out to other investors, which would render them useless. The company was able to attract such amazing talent and keep them around long-term because it's effectively run as a workers' co-op. The fund is run for the benefit of the members, who are the employees, and nobody is above anybody else when it comes to official authority. There are people that work at this fund that are more experienced, more respected, and are paid more than others. But their ideas are all treated equally, and nobody can say that something will or will not be done because they are the boss. If you Google Renaissance, you will notice that it still has a management structure and a CEO. But those individuals are mostly there for compliance reasons and to perform certain roles that must be given an official title in an investment firm. The CEO and the first-year analysts all get the same decision-making authority when it comes to how the fund deploys its capital. If the role of a manager is to choose the direction of a company, train their subordinates, and provide them with the tools they need to move the company in that direction, reward employees that excel in their work, and punish employees that don't meet their standards, it's worth seeing how the most successful hedge fund in history completed these tasks without managers. When it comes to training, Renaissance had a very particular philosophy. You can teach someone a job, but you can't teach someone to be smart. The company would often hire people like astrophysicists and world-class chess players and teach them about trading on Wall Street. This training was done collaboratively, and the company took the same approach to developing trading algorithms as scientists would take when working on an experiment. They would draw different expertise from different people, and everybody would slowly learn how they all fit together. Of course, it probably helped that most of the people that worked there actually were scientists. In our own offices, I am sure most of you have learned more about your job from your peers than you have through management-run exercises or seminars. Rewarding high-performing employees and punishing underperformers is something that Renaissance doesn't talk too openly about. The kinds of people that qualify for a job at Renaissance are always going to be brilliant in their field and extremely driven to solve problems. But people still do get fired. It's normally because the employees have collectively forced them out. But working without a manager can be a huge motivator. Letting down the boss is not nearly as bad to most people as letting down a group of their peers. I know I have put more dedication into training for a soccer final than I have into preparing pitch decks, even though soccer is something I do just for fun, and pitch decks used to be how I avoided homelessness. The fear of letting down your team is more powerful than the fear of being fired. Choosing company direction was also a joint effort. An investment fund has a pretty clear goal: make as much money as possible. But employees all decided on what strategies the company would use, what markets they would trade in, and even what investors they would bring on board. You might think that this would make Renaissance a great place to work, but most accounts say the exact opposite. The strong personalities of people who are the best in their fields all working together for long hours in a high-stress industry can cause countless arguments. But even despite that, the company has had staff turnover measured in decades and still managed to be the most successful investment fund of all time. And if that's not a ringing endorsement for the redundancy of dedicated managers, then nothing will be. But maybe we as humans just can't do away with social hierarchies. After all, we only ever learn about the rulers throughout history, which begs the questions. Why do historians only care about rich people? Fortunately, I have answered this question over on my new channel, How History Works.